Good morning. It's a pleasure to be here once again. This is, as Jesus mentioned, this is the third time that I'm honored to be here with you. And I'm here to talk about a topic that seems to be relevant year in and year out. The topic of immigration and my background. As Jesus was mentioning, I spent 30 years with the Department of Justice, and ultimately we transitioned over into the Department of Homeland Security, and I retired as the district director here in Houston, heading up the immigration office in 2005. I also spent 13 years outside the country in our diplomatic corps, our diplomatic missions with the Department of Justice, almost 6 years in Manila, the Philippines. My wife and I and my 4 children went on what was supposed to be a 3-year tour outside the country, and we stayed 13 years. It was a great experience. I was honored to represent the country, to represent our government. It was a fast-paced 13 years. We were really thrilled by having that opportunity, and ultimately, my last foreign assignment was in Mexico City at the U.S. Embassy, where I oversaw all of our operations in Latin America and the Caribbean, including, by the way, opening up the first permanent office in Havana, Cuba. As you all know, we just recently normalized relationships with our relations with Cuba, but the reality is we've been there for a long period of time, working under the banner of the Swiss Embassy. But let me go back to the topic that I want to talk to you about here today, and that's the topic of immigration, the relevancy of how relevant it is to our communities, how relevant it is to education. Because at the end of the day, that's what we're here for, and how important, what role does it play, how does it impact our communities, how does it impact the security, how does it impact the finances of our country, the community, certainly Houston, Harris County. It's really dramatic, and the impact that it has. When we talk about the relevancy, nothing is more relevant today as we have a new president that takes the leadership of our country. A president who made his initial announcement for the presidency with huge promises in many areas, and none more so than in immigration. How dramatic was that big promise when he stated that the big changes that were going to incur with the classifying some people as criminals, rapists coming into the country from Mexico. He made promises of starting on day one, which would be today, 50,000 deportations per day to remove the 10, 12 million people from the country, children from schools, parents. But as we have seen over a period of time, those promises have kind of gone a little bit different. Certainly we all understand that campaign promises and statements that are made, but certainly it drew the attention. Our new president nobody can dispute what a hugely successful businessman he is, and by the way, whose own wife was an immigrant to our country, born, naturalized, came into the United States. There was question that she might have violated the visa by working for a short period of time without the proper the status to work. But that's how complex, and I have no opinion on that. By the way, those are just opinions expressed out there. But that's how complex immigration is, how much of an impact it has on our society. Not long after the presidential election, we saw this particular article that came out in the Houston Chronicle. Trump immigration policy sows fear, uncertainty on the Texas border. And, well, I want to share with my opinion, it wasn't just fear along the Texas border that came about. There was a lot of concern from businesses throughout the country, from families that had no idea what was going to happen with the promises. And let's be mindful that during the time, and when I spoke to some of you before, when I was a district director in Mexico City, the estimates at that time in the year 2000 was that there was 2 to 3 million illegal Mexican aliens residing in the United States. From that time I had started my career with the U.S. Border Patrol 30 years prior to that, or 20 years before that. We had 1,800 U.S. Border Patrol agents throughout the United States. By the time that I retired, we had 23,000 Border Patrol agents throughout the United States. So we had increased our border security dramatically. But the number of people coming into the country illegally or legally, and then who chose to stay in an unauthorized status, increased from those 2 to 3 million in the year 2000 to, in 2010, 10 to 12 million people, depending whose estimates you took. So despite the increased security that we had, we saw those numbers grow. And by the way, when we talk about building a wall, when you see the number of people adjusting their status in the United States, like the wife of our new president, she entered with a visa, not as an immigrant. She entered with a temporary visa, allowing her to work temporarily in the United States, but which allowed her to change her status once she married a United States citizen. And there were some other categories in which she could become a legal resident. But the fact of the matter, that 45% of those folks that had adjusted their status from a non-immigrant status to immigrant status overstayed their visa. Mrs. Trump was never accused of that. So the reality is that when we talk about 10, 12, 13 million people residing in the United States illegally, it's not the people coming across the borders of Mexico or Canada. It's individuals also that are issued visas by the State Department and ultimately choose to stay in the United States. So there's a lot of complex issues there. We also see that when we talk about the security concerns of our country, we talk about are the only criminals coming across the border, are terrorists coming across the border, drug dealers coming across the borders. Of course, we know that there are many out there that wish us harm and that choose to violate our laws. But the fact of the matter, people coming in with tourist visas are also just as likely to hurt our country. And there's no better example than the 19 hijackers who blew up the Twin Towers. They were actually given visas to enter the United States by the Department of State, and ultimately, while here, set up that conspiracy that ended up in one of the most horrific acts in our history. So again, when we talk about the issue, there's so much to talk about, and I hope that I get an opportunity to listen to some of your questions and concerns. But let me share what the impact it has. And what I'd like to share today, because I can't go on about the topic for a long period of time, let me talk about perhaps three groups, three different nationalities that are impacted by immigration, and certainly in today's status. And by the way, I don't know if you all saw the reports last night, but El Chapo Guzman, who was one of the most prolific narcotics criminals, was extradited to the United States. And that was not totally unexpected. And I'm going to share a little bit of tidbit information, not to promote myself, but when you're an author, you do promote yourself, as you well know. My upcoming book has a chapter on the arrest of an individual by the name of Margarito Flores on March 13th of 1981, when I was an agent. I developed a case on Margarito Flores for a heroin delivery at 13 pounds in Chicago. His wife was pregnant at the time, and he asked me not to handcuff him because he was afraid that his wife would miscarry. So we secured the place. I'm just deviating a little bit from my story, but because it's relevant today. But I went ahead and granted that request after we secured the place, and ultimately, when we secured the place, we got Mr. Flores out, and I handcuffed him after we left the residence. His wife gave birth to twin sons, Pedro and Margarito Flores, Margarito Flores Jr. Those twin sons ultimately became the cartel leaders in Chicago. And 28 years later, they were arrested as the cartel leaders working for Chapo Guzman and the Sinaloa cartel. And now are expected to be two of the main witnesses against him because they're in federal protective custody. Mr. Flores, by the way, a year later, when they had put a contract on my life, called me up to warn me that people wanted to kill me or harm me. And so the story continues. And so last night, as I was going over some of my notes in my presentation here today, I said, how ironic. We have a new president who has a big impact on immigration. the Chapo Guzman, who's the twin sons of somebody I arrested, will be the main witnesses. So it just continues. And every year when I make presentations on immigration, where it seems that it can be more relevant, it becomes just as relevant in our country. So a lot of things happen. The Chapo Guzman is here to face justice. We have a new president, and let's see what happens with immigration. Do I have the answers for the complex issues? Will the wall be built? Will the deportation start? I don't think anybody really knows. I think all of us are hopeful that with a new change, regardless of the political affiliation we might have, and by the way, since I've been retired for a long time, I'm not shy about expressing my opinions, and I wasn't before when I retired, but usually got me into trouble inside the government. But today, I guess that's part of the being in a great country. The thing is that all of us are hopeful that this new president, of course, with the change, is done for the best for our country. And I think all of us, regardless of our background, nationality, have that particular feeling. Of course, there was concerns. You know, when you talk about a wall, when you talk about massive deportations, when you talk about targeting specific groups from entering the country, Muslims, Muslim Americans, because I think all of us, regardless of our background, will agree on one thing: the fundamentals and principles of our country will never be compromised, because we, as American people, we won't allow that. We stand for what's right, even when we don't agree. And I shared a story with this group during one of my presentations about how we meet those challenges. When I was the officer in charge in the Philippines, we had a devastating earthquake. And we had, a volcano, but we had an earthquake as well. But on the volcano, devastated our military bases. And I was honored to lead part of the crisis team. And we evacuated more than 20,000 American citizens, military members, and their dependents, and we did it in 3 days. And I was so proud to be a part of that team, because during that evacuation, Americans, legal residents, members of the military, if they saw somebody that was 8 months pregnant, if they saw them with children, they would give up their place in line to get them out first because of the devastating consequences. And I always remember that, because I used to tell the folks at the U.S. Embassy, regardless of the challenges, we as Americans always meet those challenges. And I think all of us have that hope in going to the future. And that's all my political dissertation today. Let me get back to the topic of immigration. I don't know the answers, but let's talk about what's happening at the border. We have increased the security of our border. I think the estimate last year was that the state of Texas had dedicated $800 million for National Guardsmen, for DPS troopers along the southern border. The ironic thing is that they are not authorized to arrest people illegally in the country. The National Guard cannot even arrest people doing any narcotics trafficking. They have to call in law enforcement to do that. But I think all of us would say that that's a huge impact on our country. Imagine if the $800 million could be used for educational purposes, rather than having guardsmen and DPS troopers out there. Now, unquestionably, we are not going to negotiate, we're not going to compromise on security, whether it's at the border or in Houston or anywhere else. But again, the fact that we have that much of criminal activity, folks coming into the country, it's huge. And it has a huge impact on the communities, like in Hidalgo County in southern Texas, where 90% of the population is of Hispanic origin. I grew up in West Texas, in a small town called by the name of Redford, which I always say is a suburb of Presidio, which at that time had 1,500 people, and it's a little bit sarcastic in the way I described it. But in growing up, we were used to going back and forth along that border. Well, over the years, that has changed, but our ties on the borders remain the same. Family members go back and forth, family members on both sides of the border. Trade is huge for our country, whether it's in Laredo, in South Texas. The thousands and thousands of trucks that come across is important to our economy, and important to the economy of Mexico. So the policies that we institute certainly have an impact. But coming back to South Texas, how does it impact those communities? The educational system, in many cases, is overburdened. Does it impact us here in Houston? About 3 years ago, when I first spoke before this group, we had 60,000 people showing up at our borders. every month from Central America. In many cases, that they would turn themselves in to immigration authorities, to border patrol agents. They had no fear, because what happened with our system, even though in many cases it was attributed to the current or the now to be former president, the reality that was our law to allow people to claim asylum or sometimes status when they were fleeing poverty or political persecution. There's 5 categories where people can qualify to be allowed to stay in the country if they have a fear in returning to their country. In this case, we had people fleeing Honduras, Guatemala, El Salvador. For the most part, Honduras attracted a lot of attention because of the fact that the poverty, the violence, in many cases, groups, members of Congress, stated that we had some type of obligation to assist these folks. Well, from the perspective of my career of 30 years, of having served, of being in charge of that area, the reality was that yes, they were fleeing violence, fleeing poverty, but the reality is that over the years, many other family members, and I've said this often, had come to the United States because our employers were willing to give them a job. And they came to the United States, they got jobs, and what was the next version to do? Send for your family members. In many cases, like 3 years ago, as today, we have families showing up at the borders, children showing up at the border, fleeing for the same conditions, but in reality, coming over to rejoin family members that are here in the United States. Just a few months ago, I think that totals were close to 40,000 people that were showing up, that had showed up in October of this past year. That's a huge number. So the crisis that actually we had 3 years ago is really no different. It's just that we moved on to other attention-grabbing headlines. 40% of the people that have been showing up at the border have been families or children living those countries. So again, the impact that we have, that immigration has an impact. If you look at this number, in September 2016, 39,500 were apprehended or turned themselves in at the southern border. In October, we had 46,200, with 42% being families or children. Now, when we talk about impact, here's what happens. If it's a Mexican alien coming into the United States, they get processed, they get sent back. If it's a Central American, a Honduran, South American, they get issued what we normally call a notice to appear or an immigration hearing. And for the most part, because we don't have detention space, they're not a threat to the community, they are released into our communities. And that's what I'm talking about when it has an impact on our educational system, on other services as well. You know, when we look at the backlog in our court system, which by the way, if you set up a time period, if somebody gets processed today, the court hearing might not be until 2 years later. That individual is allowed to travel into the United States and has a huge impact on where they're going. Now, as far as detention, we have space here throughout the United States for under 40,000 people to be detained while they're awaiting their immigration clearance. Generally, it's somebody that has already been processed before, has been already deported, or perhaps committed a criminal violation. And in some cases, there are family members that are held. But the reality is that we have bed space for somewhere around 35,000 or 36,000 throughout the United States. So when we have 45,000 people in custody, as you can see, we already have an overloaded system. So it's not only the educational system, it's not only the safety, it's our detention facilities that we're spending on that amount to detain people trying to enter the United States. Now, I talked about in November on the impact that it has for Mexican aliens, South Americans, Central Americans, but a big change that occurred recently when President Obama canceled a benefit that had been enjoyed by the Cuban people, and it's kind of ironic to say benefit because it's not an easy path. But as you can see in the headlines, Obama ends Cuban immigration benefits that drew thousands to Texas border. In the mid-1960s, there was a policy that was instituted that Cubans coming to the United States, if they landed, It's been called the wet foot, dry foot policy. Well, what has happened since it's been in place, those that are intercepted at sea were returned to Cuba. Those that made it to shore actually were allowed to stay with benefits of becoming refugees and within a reasonable period of time, become legal residents. It's a policy that has been long criticized, but no president has ever changed. And it was kind of a very surprising thing that President Obama did. I don't think that they expected it, even though we now have relations with Cuba, because of the fact that the president has been very welcoming in his immigration policies, if you want to say it as such, to the whatever that may be attributed to. But I think it was very surprising. Yet I think even Cuban Americans felt that it was time to change it. This policy also allowed for a lot of human smuggling to come from Cuba. Cubans would travel into Central America, South America, into Mexico, and ultimately would be smuggled into the United States. For some of those recently, when this announcement was made, that dream was intercepted right along the way. And let me share with you, during my undercover experiences, I was smuggled into the country. I traveled in the back of a U-Haul. I posed as a smuggler when I was working undercover. So I knew exactly what folks go through, and I spent a lot of time in Central and South America, and it's not easy travel to get to the United States. The magnet that we've always had is still there, and regardless of some of the public perception that's out there, everybody still sees the United States as the land of opportunity. And Cubans have long had that desire to come to the United States. Many years back, I had an opportunity to serve as the assistant officer in charge at Fort McCoy, Wisconsin, during the Mariel boat lift. And we had 125,000 Cubans that actually came across the straits of Cuba into Florida. And ultimately, there was a big change in the policy. But I had an opportunity to see firsthand. Later on, I served in charge of our INS delegation on board the U.S. naval ship Comfort, where we processed thousands of Cubans that were ultimately ended up at Guantanamo, and thousands of Haitians, of people trying to come to the United States. But this change by President Obama has been very impactful on Cubans who have long known that if they came to the United States, if they landed in the United States, they were pretty much home free, entitled to refugee benefits, ultimately becoming permanent residents of the United States, citizens. And I'll tell you one thing, regardless of whether we agree with that policy or not, Cuban Americans have always been very active politically. When you think about how long this policy has been in place, there's a reason for it. Cuban Americans have been very active throughout history. As a matter of fact, the two U.S. senators are of Cuban origin. You're talking about Mr. Senator Rubio and Menendez. So it kind of gives you an idea of how strong they are in that regard. And we know how active, but now we're talking about the Mexicans, we're talking about Cubans at the border. When you see this, folks, and I was reading the article when they were saying they didn't know what they were going to do, but they were not going to go back to Cuba. So now they paid to be smuggled from Cuba to Central America, South America, Mexico. You can bet that their efforts are not going to stop there. And smugglers prey on this. The smugglers are amazing in the way they operate. One, they prey on the fears of individuals. Even President Trump's announcement to make a wall. Smugglers were advertising, you need to get in before that wall is built. And people believe in the kind of rhetoric. So we talked about Mexicans, Central Americans, we talked about a little bit about Cubans. Let me share with you part of the reason I'm here today. I want to share one of the stories in which I went undercover as a smuggler throughout South America and the Bahamas and the Caribbean. This particular group dealt with Pakistanis, Indians, Syrians, Iraqis. Amazingly, a lot of folks didn't realize how much activity there is in South America and Central America from those nationalities. And it's not an easy journey either. Citizens of Pakistan, India, sometimes take 2.5 years to make it to the United States. They'll run out of money, they stay at their location until relatives send more money. And in the midst of all of this, we had some agents, including myself, that decided to go after some of the main culprits behind a huge smuggling organization that was based in Quito, Ecuador. It was run by an individual by the name of Niranjan Mansingh, a British citizen who had been known to us for many years. The case was extremely successful. I was already a senior officer assigned to the U.S. consulate in Ciudad Juarez, but I ended up going in as a supposedly wealthy Mexican rancher who had an airplane, and that was my in to be able to get in with the individuals behind this scheme, because years back, our policy in the United States was to go after the smugglers here in the United States. In 1996, I had what was called the first rendition of a human smuggler outside the United States who was based in Nicaragua, working with Nicaragua Interpol. I went out there and we arrested him, brought him into the country, and successfully prosecuted him. So our methods of operation, our policies changed to where we not only went after the low-level smugglers here in the United States, we started going after the criminals in places like Mexico, Central America, South America. In my view, and I'm very proud to say that the first rendition was mine, and it was successful, but it set the trend that by the time that I retired, we had brought in over 100 criminals who had never set foot in the United States and successfully prosecuted them, including the captain of a ship that brought in hundreds of Chinese aliens, and one young lady who was held hostage, believe it or not, here in Houston, was continually raped and ultimately escaped by jumping out the second window and broke her back. That's how we got into the case. But my tactics in going after these individuals resulted in the arrest of an individual named Kenny Fang, who thought he was safe in El Salvador because he was a couple of thousand miles away from our border. But coming back to Operation Seek and Keep, Niranjan Mansingh had been arrested off of the coast of Canada with over 200 migrants on a vessel. He passed himself off as one of the human cargo and ultimately was released. But instead of stopping his activity, he simply moved to Belize, Venezuela, and ultimately, because of lax immigration requirements in Ecuador and visa requirements, and frankly, because of corruption, he set up a fantastic operation in Quito, Ecuador. And that's where I came into play. Ultimately, I ended up meeting with Mr. Mansingh in Quito, Ecuador, the first U.S. agent who ever met with him face to face. Now, these were the results a couple of years later, where Attorney General Janet Reno and our Commissioner Doris Meissner announced the success of Operation Seek and Keep. And it was important because it was the first case that we had ever gone after a human smuggling organization for money laundering, organized crime, and of course the charges of what they were doing here, but more importantly, it was the first wiretap that our agency had ever done. By the time we finished the investigation, we had intercepted 35,000 calls from the phones that were being used. It wasn't an easy task because of the fact that it was a language that we're not used to. We had to bring in interpreters that spoke Gujarati. It was a fantastic operation. We had about 100 interpreters around the clock listening to the phone calls and the money laundering, money exchanges. They were going by fax. We investigated on the money laundering aspect was and I hope you get a chance to read my book because it was the first investigation of what is called the Hawala money scheme. That's a banking system, it's an underground banking system. It's quite excessive. But that was Operation Seek and Keep. Let me see if I can. I'd like to show you, if I can get our tech here, I'd like to show you a short press conference that we had. Can you pull it upwards? It's on the desk right there.
From ABC News World Headquarters in New York, this is World News Tonight with Peter Jennings.
In Washington today, the Immigration and Naturalization Service said it has cracked the largest immigrant smuggling ring in U.S. history. After a year-long investigation called Operation Seek and Keep, the INS has arrested 21 people and uncovered a complex global operation. Here's ABC's Bob Woodard.
At stash houses in the United States and at this one in the Bahamas, federal agents found illegal immigrants packed into small rooms, bags of false passports, and piles of airline tickets. In the past 3 years, the Immigration and Naturalization Service believes 12,000 Indians have been smuggled into the U.S. by 3 related international organizations. Human trafficking, they say, has become a multi-billion-dollar industry.
They are being smuggled in by well-organized, well-financed international criminal networks.
According to federal officials, the illegal immigrants were flown from India to Moscow to Cuba. From there, they would pass either through the Bahamas into Miami or through Ecuador and Mexico into Texas. The trip cost $20,000 to $25,000 each, paid either by families or the employer waiting in the U.S.
These illegal aliens were ordered by unscrupulous businesses that wanted cheap labor and wanted labor that basically had to take whatever conditions they had.
Federal officials would not say what kinds of businesses were using these smuggled aliens because they have not yet tracked them all down, but they say there are thousands of leads. Bob Woodruff, ABC News, Washington.
So it kind of gives you an idea when we talk about the magnitude of the operation. And I think it's important that I share this with you. When you all travel throughout the United States, you might go to places like Chicago, New York, New Jersey, and we went to a lot of those places, and you see Pakistanis, Indians in Chinese restaurants in New York, individuals working behind the counter. It's kind of interesting that you never know that some of those folks working there might be the victims of human trafficking, being held until they pay off their debts. We found places, and I'll mention some of the locations, like 7-Elevens, Chinese restaurants, other restaurants with migrants living in the basement, 5, 6, 7, 8 at a time. People, 10, 12 people living in a single bedroom apartment because they would save their money so they could pay the smuggling fees. For Chinese migrants, the collateral that they left behind for the $45,000 fees were the families back home. Because people always ask, how is it, why would they want to pay when they get here? Because these syndicates were so well entrenched and so well organized that they knew where to find the family members. As big a place as China is, that's how extensive the operations are. But that's human smuggling in our country. It kind of gives you an idea of how they travel, whether it was India, and this is just a small portion of the trip, because in many cases they end up in Great Britain, the Bahamas, in Cuba. Cuba allowed migrants being used by these smuggling organizations to remain there for 10 days with the visas, with the entry permits, and then from there the smugglers would fly them into the Bahamas or other Caribbean nations before they got into Central and South America and into the United States. So ultimately, our goal was to go after Niranjan Mansingh, but along the way, we also found an individual who had been a protege of Niranjan Mansingh and who had decided to oust Mansingh, if you would, as the main guy. Now, this was Mr. Mansingh during a wedding in Venezuela. And the second picture, by the way, was taken after he fled, after the indictments came out. It took us almost 2 years to track him to Venezuela, where ultimately he was arrested. And I think it took a couple of months before the expulsion was actually authorized by the then President Chavez of Venezuela. I think what's interesting is people like to say, well, how did this all get started? And there's a good story behind it. We had a young man who was a pilot who entered the United States with a student visa. His goal was to become a commercial airline pilot. He was young at the time. But as he went through school in Oklahoma, it was very difficult for him to build up flying time. Well, somebody offered him an opportunity to go down to the border and fly back. At the time, he says he was naive enough to do it because of the flying time, but soon learned, because one of the members of the organization told him he wanted to go and pick up relatives from the border. So the first couple of groups were Indians or Pakistanis that would be coming into the country, but I think on the third or fourth group they included some Mexicans. This guy started thinking, well, that's funny, I'm picking up relatives, but this guy speaks Spanish, and he got to thinking about it, so he ultimately became one of the smugglers himself, and we arrested him in San Antonio. Ultimately, he became a cooperative witness for the government, and today he's fine, but he suffered the consequences. He's not flying with American Airlines, but he became a crucial part of our investigation. Ironically, the smuggling that he was doing was from the airport in McAllen, Texas, which at that time was next to the U.S. Border Patrol headquarters. And our air branch of the Border Patrol, they could actually see as they took off. And he used to tell his clients, see, some of those guys work for me. And people believe those kind of things because he was being successful at the time. But it was very ironic that from the window of our investigations office, if anybody had been looking outside, they would have been able to see him taking off with his human cargo. I'm not going to go into all the details of all the players, but I think it's good to share some of the things that we did. If you look at this, the main guy right there is Niranjan Mansingh. After he was arrested in Venezuela, we brought him to the United States. On the left, on my right, your left, is an individual named Navtesh Sandhu. He was the first guy that we ever went after outside the United States. I went after him in Nicaragua. Mr. Sandhu was the subject of our rendition that was successful and ultimately became a policy that is still used today. On the left side, on your right, is Nick Diaz. Ned Shetty was his real name. But Nick Diaz was a fabulous smuggler, and he is a protege of Niranjan Mansingh, who decided that he was going to become even better. And he had a fantastic operation out of the Bahamas. Greed got to him because actually they had no reason to allow me to become a member of their organization. But I offered him an opportunity to use my airplane, which I didn't have, by the way, but I sounded convincing. I ultimately borrowed a plane from U.S. Customs and went out to the Bahamas, and we brought in our first payload. And I became an integral part of this organization. By that time, we had the wire monitoring going on, telephones, and of course, with our interpreters. So we built it up. Right in the middle is an individual who has since passed away, Carlos Martinez. Carlos Martinez had dual citizenship from Mexico and El Salvador. And Mr. Martinez had been a smuggler since he was 19 years old. I arrested him during an undercover operation. When Mr. Martinez found out that the other smugglers had basically abandoned him, he decided he was going to switch sides, and he became a crucial informant. And he is the one that introduced me to Niranjan Mansingh in Ecuador. On my right, to your left, is a picture of our young pilot at that time that we arrested him. And the individual here to my left, on your right, was the accountant for the organization in the Bahamas. They had an operation in the Bahamas. You saw the house. That phone rang every 2-3 minutes, every 2 or 3 minutes, constantly. There was always 20, 25, 30 clients along the way. And this individual, who at one time had been a passenger himself, had become the accountant for the organization. And they were moving about $2 million a month through that particular stash house. This is a place in Ecuador that was being used by the organization at one time as headquarters, and that's where I met Mr. Mansingh for the first time with the owner of that location, a picture here. This is Mr. Sandhu, because not only were they using land routes, they were all using boats, fishing vessels, any type of conveyance to bring these folks to the United States. Now, before I go on, I think that the question is this: are they still doing it today? We saw the Cubans, we saw the Mexican child along the border. Do we still have those nationalities coming in through South and Central America? The answer is yes. It continues even today. The tactics that I use, of course, are still employed, but things have become very sensitive where it's very difficult for agents to go undercover, like I did for that period of time. I was very blessed in being able to do that. I was very fortunate. This was, by the way, was the last case that I ever did when I was undercover, because I had already worked undercover cases for 21 years, even though I was a senior officer with our agency. I was the only senior officer in charge of an office still doing undercover cases throughout the world. I'm also proud to say that when we finished up this case, I don't know if it was because time had gone by so quickly, my son was already an agent with our government as well. So I'm very proud to say that. But Mr. Sandu was pictured as they got ready with some of their vessels, but you also see the pictures of the military who were supporting him in South America. And this is a picture that we took with the accountant in the Bahamas just a few days before we initiated the arrest of more than 30 people throughout the world. On my left is Susan Rivera. She is also an agent for our government, a very gutsy, professional agent that I was very proud to work with. She traveled with me throughout Latin America after I infiltrated the organizations, and there's a reason why I took Susan with me. When you're working undercover, you go into clubs, you go into locations where narcotics are being used, criminal activity is going on. So it was always a lot easier for us to say, well, we're going to move on because we want to go play the tourist part, whatever the case might be. But more than that, she's a fantastic shot, a fantastic physical shape, and just a very bright partner. I'm glad to call her a friend to this day. But I thought I would share that picture with you because we have there's a lot of risk in working undercover, working outside the United States. But I hope that this picture will show that we're willing to go anywhere to protect our country. And that's the way that I felt during my career. This was the safe house that I was describing in the Bahamas. And by the way, Susan and I, when we were taking the arrest down, and again, I hope you get a chance to read my book, when we were going to start the arrest in the Bahamas, we took the captain of the intelligence. He was not aware who the target was, and he was not aware that Susan and I were agents until the night that we were supposed to arrest people in the Bahamas at a location called the Crocodile. When he entered the location, he found out that we were going to arrest Nick Diaz, who, by the way, 2 days before had paid $10,000 as part of his protection money to the captain that was supposed to do the arrest that night, and the captain refused to do the arrest. But it kind of gives you an idea how dangerous it was for us. Ultimately, we forced the hand because we had gone all the way to the level of the Attorney General of the Bahamas, and my partner, Agent Irwin, was a fantastic agent, forced the issue. We arrested Nick Diaz. On the way to the airport, Nick Diaz tried to convey to the captain that he expected the protection that he had paid for. And the captain knew that he could no longer play that part, so he told Mr. Diaz, he says, we have two places we can go. There's a mountain here where we have a lot of people buried, or we can go to the airport. You can choose right now. And Mr. Diaz chose the airport. And ultimately came to the United States to where he was convicted and sentenced to 12 years in prison. Well, while in prison, he set up an attempt to kill A.J. Irwin and I, my partner, by paying $250,000. Luckily for us, his colleague, who he had authorized to withdraw $2 million from his bank account in Dubai, decided that he would rather use the money for himself than pay two agents. So they lost their friendship, but Mr. Diaz did not get his $2 million back. So, a lot of things happen. These were the passengers that you saw in the video from that particular time. We ended up with 3 different indictments throughout the United States. It was a trend-setting case that I'm very proud of. These were the documents that we found. We found thousands of documents inside that particular location in the Bahamas. It was very successful, but I think we come back to the immigration issue, and you see, I think I'd like to share is that there's different arts of my book and my career. One, I like to say that in humbly, we all serve proudly to protect our country. And I take a lot of the credit for goes in that book, but it wasn't I. There was many agents that work day in and day out. They are away from their families. They never get the credit that they deserve. Their families that are left behind. Some agents that we have lost. Some that have been injured along the way. But, I'm very proud of them. By the way, 3 of those agents are my sons. And then we have, of course, gives you a glimpse of the different nationalities of migrants coming to the United States. The reasons for coming to the United States, whether it's economic, family, to hurt us, for criminal activity. It's just such a wide magnitude. And then we see what the policies that we implement, the impact that they have on this topic of immigration. But what I'd like to do before I close up, does anybody have any questions or comments on this book, on immigration? Please don't be bashful. Like I said, I'm retired, so it might not make any sense what I say, but I try to use my experience. Yes, sir.
I'd just like to say thank you for your service to our country.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. I'm honored. It was I that thankful. I grew up in Presidio, Texas. I come from a family of 13 brothers and sisters. I think I've shared that before. We used to work the migrant camps, follow the crops, as you would say. And I had an opportunity to serve in the U.S. Navy. But what I like to say, when you work in the field of education, you guys, some of you who have attended my presentation before know that I mean this from the heart. You mean so much for the children out there, regardless of background. It's so huge. We had a lady, a teacher that had a major impact in my life, by the name of Lucia de Madrid. She set up a library in our little hometown of Redford, Texas, because we had a library. So she would get books from all over the world. And initially she started with 10 books and 20 books, but she was fantastic. And she would get books from the school library that was 75 miles away. And she had a policy at that time that you could only take 1 book out at a time. And she made one exception. I could check out 3 books. And I love to read, and I still do. But one of the things that was important in her role as an educator, she would always ask me to come in and tell her what I had read in those books. And it wasn't until many years later, and I recognized her in my first book, I acknowledge what she did for me in my first book. It wasn't until years later that not only did she want to see what stories I read, she actually wanted to verify that I was reading those books and not just checking 3 books out at a time. So she had an impact on my life. And again, whatever role you play, whether it's finances or any role that you have in education, you have an important role in our communities, and I thank you all for that as well. Yes.
I'd say one other thing too. I'm CFO of Sanchez Charter School. Our nonprofit is Association for the Advancement of Mexican Americans. As you know, the children of the world suffer, and they suffer in so many ways, physically, mentally. They're, to me, I've spent most of my career as CFOs of private health companies. This is a calling, what I'm doing right now. And I see the work that our teachers, our administrators are doing for our community and for our children and for our clients. But it's sad. They are concerned. We're concerned. But we're concerned for the parents, obviously, but we're concerned more for the students. And that's something that I hope that we as a country can come together and help those who really need.
Thanks, sir. That's a profound statement, and I think as Americans we do. We help people throughout the world. I work for refugees, with refugees. As a matter of fact, I'm on the board of our scholarship fund back in Presidio, where I grew up in. And it's not easy, as you all know, being on boards. But I'm very proud of that, because at the end of the day, that's our future, the children. In terms of the situation for our communities, it's a big concern, because how do you balance I come from a very strong enforcement background. So how do you balance that? Because, you know, it's difficult, and I think I shared this before. I got smuggled one time in the back of a U-Haul from El Paso, over to Chicago. And I talked a lot, as you all can see already, but there was a child about 5 years old in the back of the U-Haul, and I was trying to get information, and I asked this young kid, so what are you going to do when you get to Chicago? And he said, I look forward to starting kindergarten. And it was difficult because I knew we were going to arrest everybody there, so I decided to shut up and not ask any more questions. But that's the impact that it has when you're talking about a child that's 5 years old, that's in freezing weather, traveling to and those dreams. I was in a stash house in Ciudad Juarez with a 16-year-old kid. And again, you know, part of my job in talking was to gather intelligence, gather information. So I wanted to find out what everybody was doing, where they were going, because ultimately we wanted to arrest them wherever they arrived in the United States. Who were the family members, what town were they going in? And this 16-year-old kid tells me, says, when I get there, when I get to the United States, when I turn 17, I'm going to join the U.S. Army because I want to protect the United States. So, you know, how do you not get, you know, kind of wrenched up with emotions on something like that? When the first Iraqi, when the Gulf War started, one of the first that was killed was a young Marine that was 18 years old who had entered the United States as an orphan illegally and ultimately gained his resident status and joined the Marines. He was 18 years old when he was killed. There's a young lady here in Houston by the name of Guadalupe Esparza. She was 21 years old when she was killed in Iraq. She had joined the military. She was a legal permanent resident. She was the only child of a couple living here in Houston. And she joined because she wanted to further her education after serving in the military. And she was the first female that was awarded posthumous citizenship after she lost her life. So, you know, there's a lot. When we talk about complex issues on immigration, the impact it has on everyone, and coming back to young adults, children, there's President Obama signed an executive order called DACA that you might be familiar with. This is for children that came to the United States when they were 2, 3, 4 years old, brought by their parents, and ultimately grew up in a system, got educated, but then they couldn't get a job because they had Social Security. Ultimately, they were given granted a permit. That was one of the promises made by now President Trump, that he was going to cancel the executive order, which would affect approximately 800,000 people throughout the United States who have been working, who have been educated, that we've invested some money in. So I don't know how you all feel, but I actually like to get some feedback, because as I make my presentations, I speak to schools throughout Texas when I get a chance, 3 or 4 times a year, to colleges. I think it's important for me to get feedback. Anybody have any thoughts on that? Yeah, anyway, it's not going to be taken anywhere. It's not being recorded, so. Any thoughts? Any?
Again, the thoughts are the kids are the ones that suffer. And from my perspective, it's my opinion, is that we need to do something within our new government to protect those who are innocent, who came here unknown, kids, babies. We need to do something to help them succeed. And I think that's very important. I think that's the right thing to do, the moral thing to do, the ethical thing to do. They're the ones that suffer. And we as a country possibly will suffer if we don't do that. That's my opinion.
Well, let me ask you, how do we balance that? When we have employers who've made a lot of money over the years by hiring illegal labor that have not been held accountable, who have been a magnet. We have a government who has limited people who come into the United States with temporary visas, by the way, would rather go back than stay in the country and bring their family members here. You know, and that's something that I know from personal experience, because I've worked in that particular field. Workers come to the United States for 7, 8, 10 months and work, and then they go back. with the visas. President Trump, by the way, is one of his locations in Florida. At one time was bringing in 500 to 1,000 temporary workers per year. They stay for a period of time and then they would go back. So, you know, what's the correct answer? I'll give you what my view is, if you all will permit me. We have 10, 12 million people in the United States. The simple reality is that regardless of the promise of President Trump, we're not going to deport 50,000 a day. The cost is so huge to arrest and disruption, not only for families, for businesses, it's so huge that it's not going to happen. So the question is, what's the answer for that? Now, on the border wall, I don't think we're going to have a border wall. I think that there's going to be an increase in the barrier that's already there. But I think the smart thing to do for the president and his advisors would to create that wall, but with a technology. Actually, and it encompasses interior enforcement, holding employers accountable. Yet at the same time, we need to find that mechanism where if employers need workers to come in, where we make it easier. It's so bureaucratic to get a temporary worker into the United States. You have to get a prevailing wage determination for H visas. Then you file with the Department of Labor. If it gets approved, then you have to file with the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services. And then the fourth step, of course, is that you have to go to a U.S. consulate or embassy abroad to get the visa. So, and then of course, you got to make sure that they're doing the right thing, that they're physically capable, and that there's no criminal background when people come into the United States. So there's better ways to do it. And that's one of the hopes that I have with the new president. He says he's going to streamline government to make it more effective. Because right now, I just mentioned a system where we have 3 federal agencies. And by the way, I've dealt with all of them throughout my career, and I headed up one of them. They're not easy to deal with. It's a very difficult task. And yet, ultimately, we decide, yes, we take care of those folks, but we take care of our country as well. And then when we come back, and your point is well taken, we have to take care of the children. What's the impact on our schools? What's the impact on our finances? What's the impact on the community? So, you know, there's no easy answers to that.
How much of the focus in the past has been on those employers exploiting those?
No.
There's been no.
I'll give an example. American Apparel, under President Bush, received an audit. They had to fire 1,800 people that were working illegally in the country with fraudulent Social Security numbers. Nobody was arrested. They were released. The company did not pay any fines because they said we're complying with the law. We're filling out the I-9s. So what happened when you have 1,800 people that are working at this location in California, they get fired. The employer continues. Ultimately, I think last year they filed for bankruptcy, but that's a different story. So they fire all these folks. Nobody gets arrested. So those 1,800, I would imagine half of them have family members. So do we think that they went back to El Salvador, Mexico, or anywhere else with their children? Probably not. They went down the street with a competitor and got a job with a competitor. So again, I think that's one of the things that we need to focus on. On the former agency that I worked with, and which now became Immigration Customs Enforcement, they have what are called I-9 audits. They can do a simple audit. It can take 6 months to get done. They are so slow in the process that you know, they will never get to that particular point. Now, woe to the employer that does get targeted because they focus on that and they end up spending a lot of money to defend themselves. But in reality, I think there's a better system. And if I were to be asked by the new government, which they probably won't, but if I were to be asked, you can do audits throughout the United States. But here's a better answer that I will share with you. Employers are willing to comply with the law. Number one, if they know they're going to be held accountable and they're going to be targeted, they're willing to comply. But we also have to find a mechanism to where if they need labor, that we can make sure that they stay in business. And there's a way to balance that, but it's just, you know, it's a matter of what we do. For the 10 or 12 million that are in the country, we're not going to deport them. My recommendation would be, of course, to not grant legal resident status, but to give a permit where they can travel and work, you know, for 10 years. And ultimately, when you work in the United States for 10 years and you have a record of paying your taxes, not abusing the system, no criminal records, then you can apply for legal resident status. And I think a great majority of American people would be okay with that.
I would say one other thing. I think it's unconscionable that we have not in the past held employers accountable for breaking the law. Because that just propagates the whole thing. And, the system that we have right now by, CPA, but certified fraud examiner as well. And, when there's so much greed, in my view, with some employers who abuse the system, abuse their employees, you're talking about human trafficking, it's greed. And for us not to hold the employers accountable for that, and they understand that they're breaking the law and they're only doing it for their own personal benefit.
Well, I think that, and I'll close out with this. I think that all of us will agree. The magnet is being able to work in the United States, because otherwise, why would you pay $5,000 to be smuggled from Brownsville, Texas, to Houston, Texas, if you couldn't afford that? That's the important thing. But let me close up by saying this. I'm proud to have served our country, and I thank you all for that opportunity that I had. But I also want to move forward. My career is in my path, and I'm happy to share my stories with this book and my next book, which by the way is titled Deep in the Shadows, because I was deep in the shadows for many years as I worked those cases. But I also like to leave with my presentations with a statement that I know that there's hope for us in the future. For this particular issue and any other issue that we can confront. We, as a country, as Americans, always meet those challenges, and regardless of our background, I know we do that together. I was proud to serve in the Navy. I was proud to serve on a ship off the coast of Vietnam many years ago, and I'm proud to have people from all types of nationalities and backgrounds work with me, and I think that's still America today. I know those challenges, and I know that the people that run our country, that they keep that in mind, and we will meet those challenges. And I thank you so much for allowing me to be here with you today.
Well, thank you and good morning. Wow, I was fortunate enough to come in and hear about the last 30 minutes of the first presentation. I can honestly say, to the best of my knowledge, I don't think I've had a hitman after me for $4 million. I think I earned. I haven't been smuggled in the back of a U-Haul, although my wife maybe sometimes would prefer that. The topic we're going to hear to discuss is something that you guys have to deal with on a regular basis in regards to how it impacts your budget. So the goal today was really to just share some insight, give you kind of a foundation of how the Texas power market works, talk through some of the options that you guys have available in regards to procurement strategies. But before doing that, Scott, can I have you stand up for just a minute? Because Scott's going to help me at the end of the presentation. Scott Harrison's been with our company a little over 30 years. Engineering background, so a lot of technical support. He actually works on one of our 2 nuclear plants in the state of Texas, Comanche Peak in Glen Rose, Texas, up kind of towards the Waco area. So just a tremendous amount of expertise, knowledge. So we're going to tap into that towards the end of the presentation and give you guys the ability to pick his brain a little bit. He's going to cover some unique programs available at ISDs that you may not be familiar with or know about that can get you guys rebate dollars and even the ability to maybe reduce some consumption. So again, we're going to tap into that a little bit. So Scott, glad you're here. And then I'll introduce Emily Sullivan, who's also here locally, TXU Energy here in Houston, who works on our team here and covers a lot of the independent school districts here in the Houston and surrounding area. So the design of this presentation, this is your time. I mean, we put together some ideas to hopefully stimulate some questions, some thoughts. But I'd certainly prefer this to be interactive and not just be up here talking for 45 minutes about all the things that we experience when we're dealing with school districts. So again, really threefold. Going to give you a foundation, going to give you some procurement options, and then Scott's going to talk about some technical programs. Okay. How did this all come about? So, I mean, who in this room remembers HL&P? Houston Lighting and Power. I mean, before 2002, they're the local utility. And in fact, my father-in-law worked there as a lineman, as a supervisor for 30 years. And every time he mentions that company, he just calls it the light company. I worked for the light company for 32 years. Well, that really all went away in early portion of 2002. So January of 2002, this Senate bill passed, really opening up the Texas power market to competition and giving everybody in this room that lives in these competitive areas a choice of their power provider. So if I were to go through the Texas map, the biggest cities that now have choice, I see here in Houston, Dallas, Fort Worth area. If you go from Houston, you go south, 59, all that Victoria, Corpus Christi, all the way down to the border, the Rio Grande Valley border, all has choice. Then if you go over to West Texas, we have choice. The two biggest entities or cities that did not opt in to this today would be Austin and San Antonio. They're still operating under the local utility or the monopoly, so to speak, where they don't have choice, just tariff-based rates. Okay? Hold on, go back. I wanted something that really interests me, because I've been in the power side of the business for a little over 10 years, but when the market deregulated in 2002, I was on a natural gas for a company called Duke Energy, trading natural gas. I had a lot of natural gas experience. But I never quite understood how this power market deregulated in January of 2002. So they came up with this concept called price to beat. So everybody here in Houston, if you were living here in Houston in January of 2002, you have Reliant Energy. Reliant was what I would call the incumbent for this territory. Whereas TXU Energy, the company I worked for, we were the local utility in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. So we had 100% market share there. Reliant had 100% market share here. So this whole competitive market was set up to say, okay, how do we kind of jumpstart this, give consumers choice, and start cutting into the local utility? Well, Reliant here in Houston had to hold their price at what they called a price to beat. So it was regulated. Hey, Reliant, you got to hold your price at X cents. Let's call it 10 cents. And then all the competitors were coming in and undercutting that price to generate switching and savings until they lost a certain percent of market share. And then that ultimately went away, as you can see, and really this was the beginning of 2007. And we had to do as TXU the same thing in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. So that's how the competitive market started to work. Consumers started to switch and took away the whole fear of switching. Oh my gosh, if I switch, my light's going to go out. The answer is no, your lights are not going to go out. So that was just an interesting concept. I wasn't here. I wish I was on the power side note too. I just think that's a kind of a fascinating concept that you have to keep there with your hands tied, can't lower your rates, and competitors are taking your customers until you lose a certain market share. But didn't know that when I first started at TXU back in 2006. So how does this crazy Texas power market, who are the players? If you hear the acronym ERCOT, stands for Electric Reliability Council of Texas. I mean, their primary role is to keep the lights on. So they're kind of what I would say managing the grid to make sure we have enough supply to meet the demand. So they're kind of the dispatcher, telling what power plants to run, where we need power throughout the state to make sure no consumers or no businesses lose power. So that's kind of the top of the model. So the three players under that would be the generators. So this would be the power plants. Our sister company, Lumen Energies, the largest power generator in the state of Texas. We produce about 25% of the total megawatt hours in Texas. Companies that you've probably heard of, Calpine is a generating company, Dynegy, NRG, those type of entities that are generating the power. And then here in the middle, you're probably familiar with CenterPoint. So these are, I call them the poles, wires, meters company. They're responsible for, if your power does go out, their truck's gonna come out. My father-in-law and his crew are gonna show up and try to troubleshoot, get those lights back on. So that's kind of the middle. We have Encore up in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, AEP if you go down south to Corpus. But they're the regulated entities. So if you look at your invoice, you've got this energy side, then you've got this regulated side. The regulated side is there in the middle, CenterPoint charges for this area. And then on the far right, this is the competitive portion. These are the folks calling into your school districts wanting to set up meetings like THU Energy and say, hey, we can save you money or lower your rate, here's some other programs. So these are companies like THU, Reliant, Constellation, Suez, Direct Energy, Champion. I mean, I could go down the list. I would say there's 6 to 8 competitors, so to speak, that compete for the ISD segment, which is a pretty good user of power. And if you go to your house, your residential, if you're to go online and try to choose a power plan, there's probably more than 20 companies competing for your business at your residence. I want to make sure I'm not going to any questions. Again, please stop me. I thought it'd be a good idea, just kind of give you an idea, a little backdrop of what's going on the generation side, what type of, if you look at all these power plants in Texas, what fuel source are they using? And I would say the biggest change, really 3 changes going from the late 1990s to where we are at the end of 15, and these are published by ERCOT. 3 things. One is, I don't know if you can see the percentages, but coal-fired plants, which by the way we have a lot here in Texas, is trending downward in regards to the percentage that they represent in the generation stack. And that's for a lot of reasons. Some of it is cost, as natural gas prices have come down, which you'll see in a minute. Natural gas is replacing some coal units. And then 2, the EPA had certainly a microscope onto coal plants in regards to the emissions that they were putting forth. So they've been really, really challenged to stay competitive here in Texas. The coal plants, what you're seeing is coal plants being replaced by natural gas. And then I would say the biggest change in my mind is this. I don't know if you see 14% of renewables over here on the right, which we were sub 1% late 90s. And when I say renewables, I'm thinking primarily wind and a little bit of solar. And we'll talk a little bit about that, how that has become a bigger role here in Texas. Again, a couple just key facts on the right here. I keep talking wind and renewables. I'll tell you what, wind is real. I mean, wind has produced 11% of the generation in 2015, and they haven't come out with the 16 numbers. I can assure you it's up. If you were to go to the kind of the Corpus area, or if you go out to West Texas, if you've been out there the last 5 years, you're going to see these turbines. Or heck, if you're driving down the road here in Houston on 45, you'll see the turbines where they're taking them out west or they're taking them south. Just amazing the impact that wind. So 11% of the generation was produced by wind in 15. And then again, you're seeing a kind of a steady increase in natural gas. So about half the megawatt hours in 15 were produced by natural gas. It's clean, cheap. It's easy to turn on and off, so you're continuing to see natural gas go up. Hold on, go back 1 second. Yeah, that's fine. I already talked about coal.
Can you go back one? I have a question about
Sure.
chart. This one? Yeah. So that's a pretty big percentage that's still being generated by wind. Yet the capacity is much smaller. I don't understand that comparison there. What's happening in that market?
Well, there hasn't been too much change. So if we're looking at nuclear, it should be hovering around 10, 11%. Where's nuke? 10% of the generation in 15. I mean, we only have 2 nuclear plants here in Texas.
Right.
7.
Yeah.
So you got the South Texas nuclear and then the Comanche Peak. So the numbers, those are typically what I would call base load. They're always running.
Okay.
So they've been built. I mean, it's high intensive capital, but once they're built, they're producing power, what I would say cheaper really than any of these other fuel sources once they're there. So once they're built, they're pretty much running 24/7.
But we only rely on it for 10% of the generation.
It should, but as demand is going up, I think you're going to see that shrink. Because we're going to need more supply, so that number is going to be static. Because there's not going to be any more new plants built in Texas for the foreseeable future.
That's the main thing. It's just right now they're too expensive to build when you can go build. And also the timing, it takes probably 7 or 8 years to get a new come online where you can get a a gas unit online in 2 years, so.
So if you walk out of here today, and if you remember one thing, and you're thinking about, oh, what do I do at my house? When do I sign my contract at my house, or the ISD, is the most highly correlated commodity towards your Texas power price is natural gas. So when customers are trying to make educated decisions on when to do their contract, they're primarily looking at what's going on in natural gas. So what this shows you, since market deregulation in 2002, starting on the far left, my right, when we came out of deregulation, boy, natural gas prices were sub $3, and this competitive market was great. Customers were winning, we're getting cheap power rates. And then what happened really after deregulation is we went on this steady climb up to $11, $12, even $13 in some segments where natural gas was really, really expensive. And that's when in Texas, there was a lot of talk about, boy, did this Senate Bill 7 really work in giving consumers choice? Because it looks like Austin has cheaper rates, looks like San Antonio has cheaper rates than the competitive areas. So there was a lot of scrutiny over, boy, why did we do this? Is it working? And then what happened at kind of the peak here would be the shale revolution. We start finding all this abundance of natural gas. Not only do we find it, it's the technology and the improvements on getting that gas out of the ground is 10 times what it used to be over here on the left side. So what quickly happened is got an abundance, oversupply of natural gas. It's so easy to get out of the ground. All the drillers went out there, and you just seen this steady decline. This third circle, I mean, when we hit rock bottom there in 2015, this is when every time you opened up the Chronicle, people were filing for bankruptcy. All the service providers were struggling. That did work in the oil field, that did work out there. So that was kind of the bottom. But the straight average since deregulation where we are today is almost $5.50. And today, if I was to look at the 12-month strip this morning, it's probably around $3.20. So the market is now in a very favorable position for school districts, and the majority of the school districts are certainly taking advantage of this. And we'll talk a little bit about that. Any questions on this? Natural gas prices?
Yes, sir. This is just a general question. All things being equal, like you talk about San Antonio and Austin, say, whatever it is, I know at the peak, they weren't favorable, but what is the overall effect, like, say, on deregulation versus some of the regulated utilities, like on hourly PWH rates, or if you had to kind of compare and contrast?
I would say initially, competitive markets were working. And then in the middle, call it this 05 to 08 timeframe, you're in a competitive market, you're probably losing as compared to what your friends were paying in Austin or San Antonio. And now we're certainly back, and I make fun of some of my friends in Austin. I'm UT grad, so save the T-SIP jokes. They're paying more. If I ask him to send me his home invoice and I look at kind of the options I have at home, it's certainly you're getting a better rate in the competitive areas. So I would say we started off winning, went to a losing spell. Where Austin was really kicking around this idea, do we go back to the regulated and the local utilities concept? But now that it's working, now we have this abundance of natural gas, you're starting to see other areas opt into competition. So Lubbock, do we have any Red Raiders? I saw some Red Raider gear over here. Lubbock's opening up. So they're going to open up now. You'll have choice, the university will have choice, and all the residents in Lubbock. When is that, 18 or 19?
They're more just entering the ERCOT wholesale market that Lubbock Power and Light is going to buy from them. I don't know that Lubbock Power and Light is going to give their customers
choice.
Yeah.
Okay. Any other questions?
I would add though to your question, Jeff, is that in a deregulated market, you have the ability to lock in your price. In a regulated market, you take a monthly price, maybe quarterly. So there's no budget, certainty in a regular market. You take whatever the rate is, that's what you get. So in a direct market, if you have the long foresight, you can hedge your bet. You can know in 2025 what I'm paying for electricity. So I think, outside of a lower price, there's that benefit of being in a dealer market.
That's a valid point, especially for the budgets that you guys manage and needing the budget certainty. That's a good point. We'll talk about kind of even the forward market, what available to you from a school district perspective. I'll add this. So Texas, people continue to move here. So what we're seeing is we're setting new records almost every year of peak demand. So what a peak demand would be is, hey, at one point in time, how much power was being consumed in the state of Texas? And we set a record in summer of 16. We set a record in the winter of 16. So businesses are moving here. Residences are moving here. We're continuing to use a lot of power. The concern, we'll talk a little bit about this, is on the supply side. Because these power prices are so low, what does the supply look like to support all this increased demand? We set a wind record. Very question. We set a wind record. In fact, this is already out of date. So we set a wind record Sunday, November 27th of last year, and then on Christmas morning, believe it or not, we surpassed this peak and went over 16,000 megawatts of wind was feeding into the system on Christmas morning in Texas. So this whole 15,000 and change, we surpassed 16,000. So this wind it's real, it's there. The problem with wind, or the dilemma and the struggle that ERCOT has with wind is, how do you forecast it? Can you count on it? When can you count on it? When can you not count on it? As you guys know, living here, it can change within 30 minutes. So ERCOT's struggling with that. Okay, we got all this renewables, but how do we manage it and keep the grid reliable? All right, anyway, next slide. I said demand was growing. I'll add to that. If you follow the markets closely, this LNG phenomenon, which is liquefied natural gas, so it's taking the gas that's pulled out of the ground, liquefying it, putting it on ships, barges, and sending it overseas. What is happening in this segment is these huge facilities to export LNG are being built all over Texas. Freeport is going to be a huge exporter of LNG. And you're like, okay, LNG is going overseas, but I'll say this, the power consumption at these facilities it's even hard to describe. It's going to be over 800 megawatts at Freeport LNG. That will be the single largest location of power consumption in the state of Texas when it's fully operational. Then you've got these other ones in Corpus. You've got additional ones, 6 proposed in the Brownsville area. So all these LNG facilities, don't just view it as, okay, natural gas, LNG is leaving the country. That's true. But boy, there's a lot of power consumption going on at these sites that we've never had here in Texas. I can honestly say I've never been hit the pause button to do an inauguration of the 45th president. Can't wait to tell my daughter that. Maybe she'll think that's cool or something. But I'll do my best to make up a little time. Let's go to the slide about the options. I've had several of you approach me during the break on, hey, what about this, what about that? And it really revolves around this decision that you guys have to make in regards to your power contract. And the 3 most common avenues of procurement that we see in the ISD space, first one is, and this is really for like the largest of the large districts, sometimes have enough resources to issue their own RFP. I'll give you an example here locally, Cyfair ISD, they have this pretty good sized energy department, and they tackle this on their own and issue their own RFP. And we're fortunate enough, we've been serving that district for a number of years to compete and serve that district. But we're seeing less and less of districts issuing their own, and they're migrating towards, when I get to the right-hand side, it's kind of leveraging the relationship that you guys already have with co-ops. So some of the benefits of an RFP is, you do learn along the way. I mean, you learn, if you're going to do your own RFP, good or bad, you're going to listen to several different power providers, you're going to get some tidbits along the way, it's going to be a learning experience, but it's going to take a lot of time. And I know you guys are in the business of running a district and educating students, so it's certainly outside the core scope of what you guys normally do. Second avenue is, it's fee-based, but you can go find a consultant or a broker out there who raises their hand and says, hey, I'll help you guys out, and I'll collect all these bids, and I'll do it for a fee. I'll bring all the bids to you, and you guys make a decision, and you don't have to do a lot of work that way. And the third is leveraging a co-op, and we feel like this is kind of a blend of the two. The competitive process is already taking place on the front end. So for an example, a Choice Partners would put out an RFP, and all the retail providers like TXU Energy and others come and compete, and then a selection's made. You've got a couple choices within that cooperative to procure power. So we're seeing more and more agreements being signed with cooperatives and less of the districts doing their own RFPs. But certainly benefits of each. I mean, some of the benefits of the cooperative, they handle all the procurement law. You don't have any concerns. There's certainly safety in doing a contract through a cooperative as compared to trying to tackle it on your own. No RFPs required. You don't have a lot of resources. You're just evaluating the bids at the end, and they're there to help you. The power provider's there to help you. So I want to open it up now. I think this is probably the most valuable. I'll be happy to share what other districts are doing, experiences, good, bad, but this is really, I would probably assume your district is going through one of these three avenues for procurement. Any questions on this? Okay. Wow. Let's skip that one for now, just for time purposes. Here's some things. Two important things when this decision is being made is, when do I execute the contract? And I say that's important because we went through some of that market information about, hey, natural gas prices. That's the key, is when you execute a contract, is the market in a favorable position? Because I'll tell you, if you create a competitive process, the 6 retailers that are competing for that business are all going to be within, just a fraction of each other. But the difference, there's a wider difference, is when you do that agreement. So that's key. You really do need to be leaning on someone to at least keep you informed of current market conditions, so you're executing the agreement at the right time. So for an example, and one thing I also add is, don't think that your current agreement has to get close to the end or expire before you can do the agreement on the back end. What's happening today is school districts, because the market is so favorable, they are looking at doing transacting on future contracts that don't start until their current agreement ends. So you're not interfering with the current agreement. So I mentioned Cyfair, so let's talk about them. So they have a current agreement that runs through May of 2019. Well, they've already locked in 3 years beyond that. So they have a contract in place that runs through basically April of 2022. It gives them budget certainty. They know what they're going to pay. The rates are very, very favorable right now. And I've been doing this for 10 years. It used to be like customers, ISDs would do a contract. I'm getting within the last 12 months of my current agreement, so I better look at it and do an extension. This is districts doing deals out of 2020. We had a college do a deal out of 2023 for 3 years. It just kind of blows my mind. But that's a trend that's happening, because they paid 89 cents in the past, and they're seeing like 3 cent, 4 cent rates, and they're like, get me done for 5 years. Because it gives them budget certainty. It's a very good rate. And to be frank, they may not even like this procurement process. get it off my plate at a favorable rate, and I have to deal with it. You know, City of Pearland executed a 77-month. I mean, I think that didn't even start until 2019. So that's a trend that we're just seeing that we've really never seen before. And you guys can do it in this room because for two reasons. You have the buying power, meaning that your credit's good. School districts aren't going away, right? And two, your power load is very consistent. In other words, when we look at it, we know when students are arriving. We've got a very good idea of what the high schools are going to use, what the junior highs. We've got historical information. It's very easy to go out and do a forward contract with a school district. Would a TXU Energy or Reliant run out to a manufacturer of widgets that sells to oil and gas right now and say, hey, we'll sell you a 7-year contract? No, we won't do that. So leveraging your buying power is something to think about as a school district, and utilize that to your advantage, to take advantage of these rates. And Scott, why don't you come up? I'm going to have Scott talk through some of the programs that are available to you that you may not be aware of. There's different rebate programs, whether it's through CenterPoint here in Houston has rebate dollars available if you're doing energy efficiency projects. And then a lot of the providers, like ourselves, has our own rebate program. And you can kind of double dip. So if you're going to do a lighting project across the district and you're going to spend the money anyway, all this does is help on that ROI, and you get dollars back that help supplement that investment that you're going to make, whether it's lighting, HVAC, or et cetera. So
I don't need that. I don't think. We covered it. On the regulated programs, you are probably familiar. They used to have the SCORE program, CenterPoint used to. They pretty much have done away with those, but they still have the same programs. You're just rolled in with the other companies that would take advantage of it. But there are state mandated programs. They do offer you the ability to get a pretty nice rebate from CenterPoint. The problem with their programs are very regimented. You have to follow the process. You know, you have to get you have to submit your project, get a pre-inspection, then perform it, get a final inspection. They're very generally they're very picky as far as to make sure that what you have on your sheets to get the rebate it matches exactly. But it's a way to get to help buy down provide funding for some of these projects. And really the last 3 or 4 years, CenterPoint has had money the whole year. So even during periods of time whenever, I think there was about 4 years ago, they ran out of money in the first month of the program. So, but now they do have money. So take advantage of it. Your provider, whether it be like your, I'm going to say if y'all do lighting retrofits, mostly all the lighting retrofit companies do provide this service for you, and most of them do not hold back any funds because they use it to help them get the project. And mechanical contractors generally don't like the program for some reason, but there are people out there that will help sponsor. I mean, as for our customers, we're a sponsor. I've sponsored a lot of programs with the CenterPoint program, know it pretty well, can get through all the red tape. The other is REP programs. There's some REPs in the state that do have rebate programs. I think we're the only one that has a true one that goes with the majority of our contracts. We have a lot of school districts in Cy-Fair, Magnolia ISD. You'll see a video from Magnolia that has used our program quite a bit. But if you can in your contract, see if you can take advantage of that. These are funds that are dedicated solely to you for energy efficiency projects that you do, and they do come from your REP. Very simple program, and like I said, the funds are dedicated to y'all. So, okay, I'm trying to make it a little time, but demand response, A lot of times school district has a hard time with that just because of trying to, have, whether you have setbacks on your air conditioning, dim lights, whatever it might be. But there is money to be had in that. One of them, the 4CP, which is a sort of a demand and response program. If you're not familiar with 4CP, part of your rate, if you have IDR meters, and that would probably be on your high schools or some of your larger loads, the part of the components are based on 4CP KVA. So with that, if you're able to, and the way 4CP works is when ERCOT, the whole peaks during the summer, June, July, August, and September, they look at what your usage is during that 15-minute interval. So there's 4 15-minute intervals, and if you have the ability to reduce during that period of time, and generally it's from 4 to 5 on a Monday through Friday. So and then you can save upwards to about, I think it's around $60 a kW per year, or a kVA per year. So you could save, like if you had 1,000 kW load, and you're able to truly reduce that during that period of time, that could save you $60,000 for that to be able to reduce. So it's easy ways to do it, 15-minute interval, and it's ones where you're not having to really affect your school base that much. The others, ERCOT program, it's one that if they call you, you have to respond. So it's there is a capacity payment, so you definitely would get paid. But if you don't think you have the ability to respond during that period of time, that would be the others. Reps, we have a program. Other reps have a program that enable you to reduce and get payments. In fact, we've run a couple programs due to the high price of power. Whenever the RTSPP, which is the real-time price of power, goes up, we worked with Cy-Fair. They reduced, and for I think it was like a hour reduction that we asked them to do, we actually gave them, I think it was a little over $6,000. So, and then there's time of use rates. Most likely, that's not really good for school districts, but it would be one where it's higher certain periods of time that encourage you not to use. But most of the time, your students are there during the time frame that they would be asking that. And the other is real-time pricing, which really is, y'all are more interested in a fixed price, not a price for the real time, and because of budget certainty type issues. But I can go into these in great detail. Y'all would probably all be asleep. But if my contact information is here. If you have any questions, give me a call. I'll go through it with you. If you want to understand either the rebate programs or any type of demand response for CP to help y'all save money, because these are other ways other than your commodity that Jason was talking about that y'all can save money or actually get a little bit of cash inflow into y'all's system.
Yeah, but thanks, Scott. Let me sum up what he just said. School districts, if you can, on non-testing days, my mom was a teacher for 30 years, so I know not to mess with testing days. There are some school districts out there that have the controls in place to basically use your load and to reduce that load and get paid for doing that. So not many school districts can do it. But that's a place where you want to be, to where there are people that will pay you for reduction in consumption. So if you can just tweak the thermostats in all the classrooms from 71 to 73, maybe from 3 to 4 on a particular day, there's a payback. People are going to pay you to do that. That's all. I had to sum up that, and there's a lot of details in what he was talking about, but it's a way to use your load to potentially make some additional money if you can curtail. I kind of call it curtailment. You can curtail your load when the state needs it, when ERCOT needs it. There's ERCOT programs and reps that'll pay you to do that. And then we're going to listen to a quick video. Instead of us talking about TXU Energy and some of the things we can do, we're going to conclude with this, and then we'll turn it over to some questions that you guys may have.
Well, my name's Todd Stevens, and I am superintendent of schools here in Magnolia ISD. You know, one of the things we've come up with as part of a mission statement here is that we want to be the best. You know, we look at our programs, we look at the people that we have implementing those programs, and you know, just find ways to improve what we're doing every day.
You look at our budget as a whole. Obviously, the primary line item budget for any school district is a heavily service-oriented industry. Approximately 80 to 85% of all school district budgets are payroll and employee benefits. But if you were to look at kind of what is the next highest, line item budget, it's electricity cost.
It's just become imperative that we find ways to reduce expenditures in our non-academic areas. And so one of the places we've looked real hard at is obviously in electricity consumption, finding ways to make reductions there. And I think one of the great things that we've been able to do is to partner with TXU in some initiatives to go find savings in those areas.
From that end, with the assistance of TXU over the past 6+ years, we've been able to cut the electricity budget by well over 25%. We've saved almost $1.5 billion over the last 6 years, and a large portion of that is directly related to the efforts of TXU.
Those are dollars that we can put back in the classroom. Those are dollars that we can hire additional teachers with, and we're not spending to heat and cool our buildings.
They do not hesitate to call us if there's things that they see on the horizon from a market perspective, in terms of the things that they believe will benefit us as a school district. I mean, I truly believe that they have the best interest of the district at heart, and and their actions, show that.
You need a partner. You need somebody that can help you with the expertise. You've got to be able to monitor your consumption, and TXU's been a great partner in that, giving us the tools to be able to look what our consumption looks like across our district, to see what our energy consumption signature is, and then to find a partner that'll help you be able to go put real dollars back into the system to find savings. And TXU's been a wonderful partner in that.
It's allowed us to remain competitive with surrounding school districts. And TXU has, again, afforded us an opportunity of expertise. It's been a great union, and I hope to maintain it for many years.
And I would just encourage anybody looking to explore TXU and the options that they bring to the table, because you need somebody that's in your corner in that if you're going to find some of those savings.
That really concludes what we have, but I certainly hope that we have a couple minutes for any questions about the Texas power market, the options available to you, answer anything that you guys have. Yes, sir.
Kind of about demand response. You mentioned like the 4 peaks during the summer, the 4 CPs, I don't know that very well, but I would think you said that's probably good for school districts. You said $60 per DW. And I'm not tying you to that, but I think probably a lot of people in the room are like, I'm not sure how many KW I've burned, but I know I got 20,000 students in this district, right? 12,000. I think everybody in here, because we've got exactly this many students or whatever. Is there any kind of correlation? I'm going to make you think a little bit. Is there any kind of correlation to DW per student or?
They really don't have that, but most high schools in larger high schools are in the, probably over 1,000 kVA range, and like elementaries are probably more sub, 500 kVA. So, sort of get that range for you, but knowing that, it doesn't. You don't have to say. You don't have to go to zero at that. So any savings you have during that period of time, whether it be 100 kW, 50 kW, it's going to save you money on your next year's transmit or TDU cost, which would be the center point part of your bill. So just additional ways to save energy. I've got a lot of documentation that you can look at and see that explains it around when it's happened in the past, and what the value is, depending on what rate type you're on. So.
what they're alluding to, you have two sides of your invoice. The district will get an invoice. You have your energy side, which is the side you do a contract for, make that decision and get a rate. And then the center point charges all add up. You might see it on your residential bill as well. Well, most consumers don't realize they could potentially impact those center point charges. So that's what these two are talking about, is if you can reduce your consumption, you can save on the center point side of your bill as well and have less pass the remaining for the next calendar year.
And majority of the REPs just pass through. You'll see a piece of your bill. It's a pass-through charge. We get charged $10 for what you use. We charge you $10, and it comes across. The REPs bill for CenterPoint, but we don't add any dollars associated with that. So.
Yes, ma'am.
I just want to make a general comment to kind of broaden the discussion a little bit further. I think these programs are phenomenal, and every district should take advantage of them, hands down, absolutely. What a lot of districts forget to do is they go for the sexy statements that say, oh my gosh, look at all this money I saved, instead of look at how I reinvested this money and address all the different maintenance I have in my district. Realize that when you do a lighting project, you get that immediate bump, and you get that rebate, you get that reduced energy use. Very few districts remember that you need to use that money to upgrade all those HVAC units that are now 15, 18 years old that are going to break down, and that you don't have monies in CIP to handle. And going out for bonds for things like that are becoming less and less palatable by the citizens. So just remember to combine these and truly take advantage of what's being offered here to really address the needs of the district.
Yeah, and you know, you mentioned LED lighting, and that seems to be the big rage right now, but you know, it does save a tremendous amount from an energy perspective. There's generally great lighting, but it also reduces your maintenance greatly, because that now you've almost quadrupled the time of life of your lane, where you don't have your maintenance guys having to go out, change fluorescent tubes. And so there's a lot of other benefits, and also with HVAC, if you upgrade it, you know, your maintenance issues do generally go down also.
And you're able to address some of your outside air issues, you can address a lot of your CO2 sensing issues. I mean, there's things that your schools need that have been deferred and deferred and deferred.
And I've seen internal discussions within these districts on where those funds go, that they say, does it go into the general fund, does it go to the stay in energy management? That's y'all's but there's two components to a power bill, and everybody focuses on the rate, and I get that. And what I would challenge you, your respective district, is also look at that consumption portion, because it's consumption times your rate. Everybody's rate, and believe me, we're as competitive as anybody in the market, and we will be. But where we really help our customers is on the consumption side. We have some ideas, we have some expertise, we know about the programs to say, you can really save some money on this side and lower your overall consumption. So I just want to say thank you. We'd love to come out and meet with you at your respective district. If you have any questions, again, but thank you very much for the time, and I appreciate you guys allowing us to come into your meeting. Can't wait to tell my daughter interrupted by the president.
Thank you all very much. Can everybody hear me okay? One of the things that we were just talking about, I have followed a lot of different people over the years and given talks. I've never gotten to follow the inauguration of the President of the United States before. And so when I tell this story to my grandkids, I will follow what most politicians kind of practice they have, and just tell them part of the story. I want to tell the whole story. What I'll tell them is, actually, on January 20th of 2017, I actually followed the President of the United States in his speech accepting his presidency. I want to tell them I was in Houston instead of Washington, but that would be something that they have to learn. I appreciate y'all letting me come talk to you. How many of y'all come next weekend to the Midwinter Conference? Do most of y'all come to that or not? You need to get your superintendent to let you come to Austin for the Midwinter Conference sometime. We have a Sunday conference every year that we provide barbecue lunch. We start at about 11:30, and then we go from about 12 till 4, talking about school finance issues. This year we'll have Larry Taylor as one one of our guest speakers, Senator Taylor, and we'll have Representative Darby as another one of our guest speakers. And they'll come and visit with us about legislative issues, about school finance, as far as what they're thinking about. And it's just a real good conference. And the reason I mention it is that Harris County is one of our sponsors. And we are able to provide it free of charge to anybody because Harris County helps to sponsor it and they help pay for it. So just wanted to put that plug into them. We appreciate it. They have been one of our sponsors for many years and we appreciate it very much. And so if you're in Austin next Sunday, if you want to come, if you're going to be there, just sign up or just show up and we'll register you on the spot, no problem. And it'll run, it's in the convention center up on the 4th floor. A couple of things to get started with. I gave you a couple of sheets of paper, and the first few slides actually don't deal with our plan as such. They deal with a couple of issues that the legislature and a lot of the things you hear going on affect you from the standpoint of just like with a lot of the national politics, state politics, a lot of times we go in and we make issues out of things that really aren't issues, like answering gender issues and the things that you deal with that politicians bring up consistently that they make an issue out of, but it's really not the issue that needs to be addressed. Well, we're dealing with a couple of those in school finance. One of them is ASICAR. Now, and some of you may get ASICAR, most of you do not. Okay? But one of the issues is ASICAR is scheduled by the legislature to go away September 1 of 2017. And the issue for ASICAR is the districts that have been getting that over the years want to keep it. And they're working really hard to keep it and get the legislature to extend it. I think Senator Colcourse wrote a bill that extends it for 5 to 10 years. There's 3 or 4 folks in the House that have written bills to try to extend it and keep it going. What ASICAR really is, folks, is it is a, when school districts say they can't get along without it, they've got to have it, they're going to close their doors. What they're saying is, we have this money that we get that's over and above the formula that the other 800 districts in the state are funded by, and we can't survive without it. But all the rest of you are supposed to survive without it. And what really happens to you is this. School funding is a pie. It's just like you got this great big pie. And it's just like if I had this pie up front for dessert today, and everybody in here, we had exactly 40 people here, however many, we had 40 slices of pie that were equal for everybody to have a piece of pie, and that would basically be fair. We'd all have a shot at the same dessert. Well, what happens with school funding is we take that pie and we go in and we take 3 or 4 of those slices out of the big pie and we set them aside. And then we take the rest of the pie and divide it up among the 40 of you, and then for 3 of you, we take that extra piece of pie and we give it to you on top. Well, that's what ASICAR does. That's what we do in school funding, and that's what we've got to get away from if we're ever going to fix the system and be fair to taxpayers and be fair to you as you try to provide the money that's needed to educate the children in your district. So one of these sheets here deals with that. The stapled together one right here, if you look at it, it has all the districts in Region 4 Education Service Center. Some of you may not be in Region 4, so you won't find your name on here, but it's by the House member that is in there. And when you get out there to the right-hand column, this is for FY16, which is the last year we have accurate data for it. Whatever they're showing for FY17 is still just projection. And as you see from 16, what they had projected, they thought they'd spend in 16, they missed by about $100 million. Okay, it was about $100 million higher than it was the year before. And that's the problem with that star, because in the formula, the way it exists now, as property values go up or down, ASICAR goes up or down. Okay? The problem with it is, look at KDISD at the top. The problem with ASICAR was, because we didn't have that money in the pie, Katie lost $4 million. You see all the reds over there? That's what's happening to you. Dealers made off because they got acetone. Okay? And what we're not saying dealers didn't need it, that extra money, but if they need it, Katie does too. You know? If they've got to have it to educate their kids, then you've got to have it to educate yours. So the whole purpose of this sheet is just to show you and give you something that you can share with your representative or your senators about this is how, if you let people put acetar back into effect, if you don't go ahead and let it die like you have said you were going to do, this is what you'll be taking away from us. This is how you'll be hurting our district by keeping acetar around. And that's the whole purpose of that particular sheet. The other sheet deals with target revenue. And let me go ahead and hit this, because I think the first couple of slides in our program deal with acetar. acetar is additional funding for schools above and beyond what's guaranteed in similar districts with similar tax rates. The truth is, acetar districts have about a 6-cent lower tax rate than the rest of the state, than non-acetar districts. And they have hundreds for some districts, hundreds of dollars per student more. For some districts, $2,000 and $3,000 per student more than what the formula generates for you. So that's what it does to you. They're almost always funded at a higher level, have lower tax rates. acetar is a major offender of taxpayer fairness. And acetar is unfair to taxpayers paying high property taxes in low-funded districts or the majority of districts. But the worst part is, here's what happened to us. Texas is almost like we have 1,018 school districts, and it's almost like we've got 1,018 school finance formulas. We fund everybody differently. And so because we've done that over the years, we have winners, high-funded folks, and we have losers, folks at the bottom. And anything we do to it, any little piece we want to fix, any little partial we want to do, when we do that, we just start jockeying winners and losers. And what happens to us then, as superintendents and CFOs and people in the process of trying to educate children, is we look at the printout and we determine whether or not we're winning or losing, and that becomes our focus, instead of focusing on a system of financing schools that is fair, that treats us all the same, that provides the same educational opportunities for a child in Houston as it does in Austin, as it does in Brownsville, as it does in Dumas. Wherever that child is located, they ought to have the resources at the same tax effort to fund the same type of educational opportunities that they do in any other district. And that's what the issue is. And so the issue becomes, instead of educators, the very people that represent all the children in the state of Texas, instead of us being unified in fighting for one thing, being able to go to Austin and say, you got to raise the money that you're putting in public education because it's not adequate. Instead of that, we go to Austin and we argue about whether we got to keep acetar or whether we got to do away with the recapture. Okay? We've got to find a way as educators to get away from that. And we've got to convince our people in our communities, we've got to get away from that, or we're never going to fix the problems in the system. And we're never going to provide adequate funding because we can't determine what adequate funding is. It's a great tool for the legislature because all they got to say is, well, we don't know what adequate funding is. Everybody's funded at different levels. Who's right? What's the right level? Until we get it where we uniformly fund this, we don't have an adequacy argument. When we get to that spot, then we can say, yeah, it's inadequate. And we can prove it's inadequate. Okay? All right, I'll try to put preaching into you a little bit here. Recapture. The second sheet is about recapture. Recapture is, well, there's no way to say it. LAFD has made recapture a huge issue, okay? Recapture exists for one purpose, and that is for the purpose of the state being able to access its wealth to educate its children. The problem for the state of Texas is we have wealth in certain communities because of oil and gas, or because of skyscrapers, or because of oil refineries, or whatever it is, but it's not always located where the kids are. The wealth in the Houston area isn't located in Cypress or Klein. You know, you might have wealth in enclaves, but homeowner wealth isn't what drives the wealth of the state of Texas. I'm sorry. There are some areas that have wealthy homes, but homeowner wealth, that ain't where we're wealthy. It's oil and gas in the ground, it's skyscrapers, it's big companies, it's big business, it's Exxon, and those people pay taxes, and they pay it with money that they get from around the world, not just the community they're located in. So recapture, its whole purpose is to let the state access its wealth for the benefit of the state. That's the whole purpose of it. In 1977-78, when there was no recapture, and everybody just had the ability to raise what they could locally, the gap between the poorest district in the state and the wealthiest district in the state was 1 to 1,137. What that means is for every dollar that poorest district could raise, the wealthiest district could raise $1,137. The tax rate in the poorest district for them to equal, if the wealthiest district taxed at $1 to get what they wanted, the poorest district would have had to tax at $1,137 to equal that output. That's why recapture exists. You can't equalize things if you don't equalize the tax burden across the state. And so recapture, while it's getting a bad rap, is not a bad thing. And the only way that you can address it and do it right is like this. Recapture raises the whole state, and so you have to do things that impact the whole state the same way. You got to put your money into the basic allotment, which raises the bar for everybody and raises recapture. Or you can put your money in the copper penny yield. You know that this year, on the projections that just came out this week, on the House and Senate budgets, you know what they're projecting for the Austin yield? Y'all seen that? You know what it is now? It's like $70, something like that. Pennies in tier 1, first 100 pennies, or the press tax rate basically is $51.40 a penny, $74 for the 6 golden pennies, and then the 11 copper pennies, or however many you have, is $31.95. You got those 3 different levels, which is ludicrous in the first place. But anyway, you got those 3 different levels. The next thing, the Austin level on golden pennies is projected to go to $99 in 2018 and $106 in 2019. You'll have a gap between the first 100 pennies and the next 6 of double, 51.40 to 99 or 106. You'll have a gap between the copper pennies that's over triple, 31.95 to 106. Is that not a stupid plan? I mean, how did we get to this point to where we do it? Well, we got to that point because the wealthiest districts had to have 6 pennies that weren't recaptured. This is what causes our problem. So the arguments you're going to hear from everybody about recapture just don't tell the whole truth. Lack of a better term. Houston argues that they're paying $160 or $70 million in recapture. You do know that everybody in the state of Texas, every school district gets state aid. When you take Houston's $130 million of state aid off of that $170 million, yeah, they're gonna pay about $40 to $50 million in recapture. The interesting thing about Houston is, the problem is, the property values are growing and they're stagnant on how many kids they got. That's what's causing the problem. All their kids are going to charter schools. They're losing lots of kids to charter schools. State of Texas, you know how much the state of Texas spends on charter schools? We pay 100% for every charter school because they got no tax base. All of it's state dollars. You know how much we spend on the charter schools in Houston? ISD, just the ones in Houston next week. Anybody want to guess? This is a great figure. Anybody want to guess? Somebody guess for me, just for fun. How much you think?
10 million.
How many?
10 million.
10 million? That's a good guess. Anybody else? Anybody think it's higher than that? How do you think it's higher than that? You think it's 100 million? You think they spend that much? Anybody think it's 200 million? It's $270 million. It goes to children that live in Houston ISD. And you know what happens to Houston ISD's recapture money? It goes straight to our school, and they turn it right around and send it right back to kids that live in Houston ISD. It's not going anywhere else. It's not going to the rest of the state. It's not going to the rest of the state's budget. It's going back to Houston. We just play games with stuff, and we tell part of the truth. We just don't tell all the truth. We fail to tell that, oh, yeah, we get another $120 million, $130 million in state money, so our recapture is really not as bad as we claim. But we run, shout, and do a lot of things on that. So I'm not just trying to beat the drum on Houston. I'm just trying to use them to make the point about recapture. Recapture is a necessary tool that the state has to have to try to be efficient in all of their school budget. If they don't, they've got to have something like statewide property tax. They've got to have something like consolidation. They've got to take the property like they're saying they're doing for Houston now. That's the other options if you don't have that. Recapture is the easiest one to do. Okay? Any questions about that? Those are issues you're going to hear about, but they're not the problem. They're just they're like the bathroom bill. They're just stuff that people are screaming about, but they're not the problem you face. The problem you face is our current system's inefficient. We have numerous inefficiencies in our current funding system, and that's what hurts you. So we have a plan. Now, politically, I can't promise you that it would happen or not. If you talk to your representatives and your senators and tell them you like it, it's got a lot better chance of happening. And to be honest with you, we've talked to a lot of folks about it, and there are lots of members of the House and the Senate that want to fix school finance. They really do. They honestly do. But politicians, you know the old story about politicians. They are running. They wait to see what the crowd wants, and then they run to get ahead of the crowd and lead the charge. Kind of sounded like the inauguration speech this morning. But anyway, I won't make any more coverage about that. But that's it. And so they're going to wait and see if the groundswell of people will want to do this, and then they get behind it. But that's what this plan tries to do. Okay, here's state policy. Y'all are familiar with this. Right out of the education code, it was adopted in '95. We're supposed to have a provision of public education. It's the state's responsibility to have an efficient system, and each student is supposed to have access to programs and services appropriate to their needs and substantially equal to those that are available to any other student. That's state law. We're hell and gone from that one, folks. We're not anywhere close where we stand. Okay? Second part of it is neutrality. Provide substantial equal access to similar revenue per student at similar tax effort. If I'm paying $1 tax, my kids ought to have the same educational resources as anybody else in any other. other district that pays a $1 tax. That's the way it all works. Okay. After 1995, that's the promise that was made that we still haven't kept. So here's the steps. You got to establish guiding principles. We came up with 3. It ought to be a world-class free-public education system because our kids compete on a world-class basis. They no longer compete just in Houston. They no longer compete just in Texas. They compete worldwide. I've got a son, my second oldest son, graduated from Italy High School. Y'all know where Italy, Texas is? It's Italy. There's no A in it. It's just I-T-L. Italy, Texas. Okay. Italy, Texas is right on I-35 when you get just north of the split going to Fort Worth and Dallas. It's about halfway between that split and Waxahachie. Y'all know where Waxahachie is? Well, Waxahachie is just south of Dallas, about 35, about 30 miles. It's about 40 miles south of Dallas. Okay. Little bitty school, probably about 800 kids in the school altogether. High school, a couple hundred kids. He graduated from Italy High School back in the 90s. He lives in Hong Kong. He lives and works in Hong Kong for an international company. And he's just like a bunch of our kids. It is a world-class economic system that we're in, and that's what we got to educate our kids for. Children in each district should have access to educational opportunities appropriate to their needs. An efficient school funding system doesn't make winners and losers. The current one, like we said, it's all about winners and losers. But an efficient one doesn't. It guarantees the same funding level for everybody. An efficient system is devoid of waste. If it costs $13,000 per weighted student in sundown to have an adequate education, that's per weighted student, not per ADA. So that's taking into account special ed, bilingual, etc. If it costs $13,000 a kid in sundown, Texas, in the Panhandle, and you're getting $5,000 or $6,000 per weighted student in your district, which one? One of them's wrong, isn't it? Either you're adequately funded and that money's wasted, or they're adequately funded and you're way underfunded. One of the two. That's what we're talking about. We've got to get away from wasting that money. And the only way we can determine what's waste and what's adequate is if we're all funded at the same level for the same tax effort. Okay. So the steps to an efficient school finance system from where we're at, you got to establish guiding principles. That's what we just talked about. You got to identify inequities and efficiencies. That's what this is. Here's the current system. Y'all are familiar with this. Tier 1, Tier 2, regular pennies, basic program, Tier 2, golden pennies, Tier 2, copper pennies. INS we don't address because INS is going to cost money. There is no way to fix INS because we've ignored it since 1999 without putting money into it. Okay? That's another step, and it absolutely is something that needs to be done, and it's absolutely a huge inequity for INS. Folks that are in the system that get the $35 per ADA and INS, the wealthiest districts in the state it would take the poorest districts in the system 50 cents to equal what the wealthiest district in the state can raise at 5. 10-to-1 ratio. Okay. So it absolutely needs fixing, but we do not address it in this one because it's just a step too far right now. Would it be doing good to fix maintenance? Here's what we've done to it over the years. We just keep putting Band-Aids on it. This last time, and if we try to do something with recapture to help Houston, we'll just be sticking a huge on top of the system. This last time, when we tried to give everybody a $10,000 homestead exemption, we couldn't even do that without having to stick things on the side, more hold harmlesses on the side for the districts that were funded at the highest levels out of the formula system. If you're funded in the formula, you didn't get any extra money. That $10,000 was just your property values going up or down. You got less. They took less of your local tax collections to fill the bucket than it did before. You didn't get any help from it. If you were funded outside the system, you got extra money to make up, so you stayed there where you were. We can't That's what's killing us. It's those Band-Aids like that that make winners and losers in their system. So here's the solution for what we think it is. No free lunches, just like Acosta. For those 200 districts to get that money, somebody pays the other 800 districts. That's the way this system is. If it's not a cost-based item, if it's not something that the state accepts as a statewide cost, it doesn't need to be in the system. Okay? Special ed, everybody knows, takes extra money. That's a state-recognized cost. The weights are old enough, they probably need to be addressed with a study and find out how they need to be updated. Bilingual, comprehensive, all those things are the same, but we know there's a cost there. Just because I always had this money in the past, that's not a state-recognized cost. I'm sorry. That just isn't. There may be something that needs to be added to the cost we currently recognize, but that's something we as educators need to go to them and say, yeah, we need a formula that provides for fast growth districts that does something for that. Those are the things we need to be able to add and talk about it as a whole, not just so it just helps. So you've got to remove the inequities, you've got to simplify and stabilize the system, you roll the resulting savings into the basic allotment to drive it up. And then you ensure that all property tax growth goes to fund public schools. If we could just do that, that would help us and would help us provide an inflation fighter. If we could just do that, just keep them from taking increased property taxes and reducing the state money that they put into the system because your property values went up. Here's what we do away with, and then some. There's not any tier 2 levels anymore. There's no copper pennies, there's no DTRs, there's no water, there's no well harmless, there's no golden pennies, no target revenue, no ASTAR, no Austin level. All that stuff that, you know, when you, how many tabs are there on Omar Garcia's? Do y'all use this sheet when you're doing school finance? But, you know, how complicated is it to figure school finance? The formula, okay? It shouldn't be. Really, it shouldn't be complicated. You ought to be able to explain it to your school board and to John Q. Citizen, and it ought to make sense for everybody. It ought to be more simple. It isn't now. And so what we tried to do was get away from that nonsense. So what we did was we created a system that guarantees every district access to the full allotment to which they're entitled for the categories below. We took the district adjustments. Currently you got 3 of them. You got the small district adjustment, the mid-sized district adjustment, the CEI. And we left those the same. We put all the small districts on one, which makes it 0004 instead of just 0025. We go to one tier. There's no tier 2 in our system. And so the CEI now has the full effect instead of just a 50% effect of the tier 2. You get the benefit of the full 100% effect of the CEI throughout the system, which is a plus and is a good thing to do. But other than that, we don't change any of that. But we do that with the district adjustments, district weights, and then we go to these student weights and student allotments. We didn't change the weights in the allotments from where they're at. Those need to be studied. It's kind of the old mathematical question. What wrong number do you multiply by a wrong number and get the right number? We don't know what the weight ought to be. We don't know what the basic allotment ought to be. Until we can get to a system that lets us get there, we've got no business changing weights. Even though it might help Houston, you can't design a system because it helps this one district. You've got to make policy and design systems on the whole state that does right by the whole state. Okay, so we keep regular program allotment, special ed allotment, career tech, comprehensive, bilingual, and transportation, of course, is some people are in co-ops, some districts have it, so it's kind of its own thing. It's not really a student allotment. It's more of its own special allotment. But we keep those 5 student allotments. Anything missing in those that's currently there, we y'all recognize? There's some that are missing that we've done away with. There's no GT, not because we don't believe in GT, but how do we fund GT? How much you get a 0.12 multiplier for how many of your kids? 5%? Don't you get the same? Doesn't everybody get the same? 5%? Whether you got, I don't know, maybe you got 10% of kids are GT, maybe you got 2%, I don't know. But everybody gets credit for 5%, and that's your funding for it. Well, everybody's getting the same, why do we have an allotment? Just roll that money into the basic allotment and move the whole system up. So that's what we do. There's no high school allotment. High school allotment supposedly was to fight dropouts and prepare kids for college. What were regular programs at college? At least that's what we claim our standard is. Everybody goes to college. So the regular program ought to be enough to do that. Cooperative is supposed to help with dropouts. In the side point, where kids, most kids drop out, the vast majority of kids drop out before they get where? 9th grade. First high school started. 9th grade. We fund the high school allotment for kids from 9th grade up on ADA. So who are we funding? We're funding the schools that don't have a dropout problem. Because the schools that have a dropout problem, those kids aren't in high school. They've already dropped out. It doesn't do what it's supposed to do. So we eliminate it and roll that $500 million into the basic allotment. NEFA, we didn't eliminate it on our own, but we talked to some CFOs from past growth districts and they said, do away with it. It's not enough to make a difference, do away with it. So we didn't. I firmly believe fast growth districts need something. I think facilities is the biggest cost, so they definitely need something in the facilities here. But I think they probably need something for the first year or two of a new facility, even in Monroe. But we haven't been able to adequately determine what it is that they need. So that's one of the things that when you take this as a starting spot, that's one of the things that we as educators can come back and say, okay, we need this put back in, or we need this added to the program. And that's what it's for. But we look at that with egg grants, $2 million statewide. It might be a good idea, but the way it's designed, it is not getting used, so we just eliminate it. If it needs to come back, then bring it back, but it's not being used, so we eliminate it. There was one other. Gosh, I wish I wasn't getting old. But I did better than Perry. I remembered 3 out of 4, not just 2 out of 3. So I'm better than he. All right. So anyway, so that's what we're doing. Does that kind of make sense to folks? Y'all see what we're doing here? So that's your formula. You're guaranteed what your allotment would generate. Okay? Your adjusted basic allotment based on your district weights, times the kids in special ed, the regular program, blah, blah, blah. All that summed up, that's your box. That's your formula. This is the way we say it. The formula is so simple, you don't even need one. But this is it. This is school finance right here. Your district funding equals the sum of your allotments, the allotments we just talked about, times your adopted tax rate. What that means is every penny of an adopted tax rate equals 1% of the sum of your allotment. So if you tax at $1, you got 100% of the sum of your allotments. If you tax at 90 cents, what do you got? You got 90% of the sum of your allotments. If you tax at $1.17, which some of y'all do, what do you got? You got 117% of the sum of your allotments. So you're allowed 17% enrichment in the fact that, with where we are right now, I'm not sure the sum of the allotments really gives you enough to adequately educate all your kids. So it puts some leeway in there to start with. But that's the plan. That's basically it. Is that, anybody got any questions? Is that kind of, Wayne and I would look at each other when we talk about this. We worked on this a long time because we just couldn't believe what we would find when we looked at it. You know, we looked at it with each other and we'd say, can it really be this simple? Can it really be this simple? And it really can, folks. It really can be this simple. And it should be. Doggone it. When we talk to people, heck, I can't even keep up with it. I work with it every day. And the question will come up Monday in the office, and somebody will ask me a question, and I'll have to go and say, gosh, I can't remember how that works. And I'll have to ask somebody else. I mean, you just can't keep up with it. It's got so much garbage in it. There's no way. And with everything else you have to do, you sure can. You need something that you can count on, that's simple, that works correctly. One of the things that's not in this is prior year values. Okay? Let me show you. This is what I just told you, 1% per penny. And so that just shows you if your allotment was $1 billion, then you taxed it $1, you got $1 million. If your allotment's $1 billion, you tax it 90 cents, you got 900,000. If it's $1 million, you tax it $1.04, you got 4% extra, 7% extra. That's just a demonstration of what we're talking about. But here's kind of graphic on it. Over on the left, you see the blue box, the district funded amount, and that includes transportation. But transportation's added on to the sub. You got the sub of your student allotments, and then transportation is its own item because it's different. You know, I mean, it's a mileage kind of thing. It's a thing where not every kid in the district rides a bus. Some districts more than others, so it's its own kind of separate deal that needs to be dealt with separately. But it's added on in the district amount. But it's a different amount per district because you got different transportation needs. Okay. That's your bucket. First money in everybody's budget is 80 cents per capita. Okay. The reason we did that is because for most of you, probably all of you in here, but for 800 districts out of 1,000, that's where you get it right now. There's a couple hundred districts that don't get it there. They get it on top of the bucket. We don't care. Give it to everybody on top of the bucket, that's fine. Make it an extra. But give it to everybody in the bottom of the bucket, make it the first thing. Do it the same for all 1,018 districts. Don't make it a bonus for some and a subtraction for others, as it is right now. So we just stuck it in the bottom. Everybody gets it. It's the first money everybody gets, and that's the way it is. Second money is your local tax collections for that year, whatever they are. Okay? If it's a great year, maybe you pay more than 100% in. You got a bunch of delinquent taxes that come in, maybe you got more than 100% in. Well, it goes in the bucket. If it's a bad year, and you had somebody hold their taxes out and you only collected 92%, then you got what you put in the bucket, but it's your collections that go in the bucket. Now remember the formula we talked about was your allotment times your tax rate, okay? That's what sets your bucket, not your collection. Okay? But in your bucket, your part of it is what you collect. So if you have a good tax year, you may lose. You may not get as much state money. If you have a bad tax year, you're going to get more state money. But it's what you collect that year, not what happened to your property values the previous year, or whether they're going up or down or around the world, wherever they went. Okay? It's that year. And the rest is made up by the state. The rest of the bucket's by the state. Does that make sense? Is that kind of easy? Okay. All right. So there are some districts still that would collect more in local taxes than what their budget requires to generate. And that actually, the system might change from year to year. You know, recapture is kind of one of those things now where once you're on it, you're on it. Okay? In this system, districts could go in and out of this depending on how much you collect that year. You might collect more than enough one year and have to send some money to the state. You might not collect as much the next year, and the state sends you money. either way, it's based on what your formula generates you and what your collections are that year, not on anything else. It's that simple. Okay? But the excess to formula, which he will now call recapture, which isn't what recapture is anymore. When they figure recapture now, y'all have looked at the fund on the pages on the TEA's website that you have to go through. You know where it starts? They have to go all the way back to 1991. And they do this myriad of calculations through 6 or 7 pages from 1991 to now to determine what recapture is. That'll be this. If I can collect more than what the system generates for me, that is what the state needs to fund the whole system. It leaves me and goes back into the system to drive the basic allotment up for everybody, so that everybody benefits from the wealth of the state, not just me. So, am I just way out in left field, or does that kind of make sense? Generally, when we're talking to folks, CFOs get it quicker than anybody. In fact, not generally, they always get it quicker than anybody. Because you deal with it all the time. That's why you get it quicker. But that's basically the program. 100% of taxes collected for public ed need to stay in public ed, need to be spent that. 100% of recaptured funds need to go back into the basic allotment. Right away. And what happens when you do that is that becomes a driver. I know a lot of people are talking about needing a driver in the system. We've talked about needing a driver in the system for decades, okay, for inflation and other reasons. The legislature doesn't want to do a driver. They don't want to be obligated to do that. Well, if we could just get them to agree to do this, it creates a driver in the system. Because what happens to property values, generally speaking? They generally trend up year in and year out. And so you've got a driver in the system just from keeping property values in there and getting credit for them. All right, the hard part about this is, in this system, there are no winners and losers. When you run the model, whatever amount of money you've got to put in it, when you run the model, every district, when you get out to the end and you do a wallet amount on the student allotments, it comes out the same for every district in the state. There are no winners and losers. Our current system is where the winners and losers are. And because we have winners and losers, when you move to something like this, most districts, 700-800 of them will win. But you're going to have some that aren't going to be at the higher level that they're at. Okay? So you may very well need a transition time. You may very well need to come in and say, okay, we're not going to cut your legs off this first year. We're going to transition you back to it. But if you do it in a way that makes sense. Don't do it like we currently do it with Wealth Harmless and Acetar and SAE. Y'all know what SAE is, don't you? That's the one that they did for the homestead exemption. SAE. Okay. Don't do it like we did that. Don't base it on the student counts. Don't put it in the formula. Put it outside the formula as a line item in the budget and make the state of Texas and the legislature own up to it every 2 years when they come to Austin. If they decide they want to spend $500 million for transition that got in, okay. But make them own up to it and make it a line item in the budget. Base it on the last year. You know, whatever, in 2017, Houston ISD got however many billion dollars they got total. Not for what? Total revenue. Under this plan, they get $200 billion less. So for 2018, phase it in. Maybe you want to give them 80% of that. So give them $160 million. Outside the formula as a line item in the budget. That way, it goes away. And you're not listen to people talking about this cliff we're going to fall off of in 6 years like we are right now. Okay? Ask the clerk. Go ahead, I'm sorry.
I'm just focusing on
Sure.
finance versus like other
some of your allotments, when you use the same allotment for everybody, okay? When basically your special ed students, okay? Whatever district you're in, special ed student with this particular definition, it used to get raises the same weight or same allotment as the same student in Austin or the other students.
So it is per student then?
Mm-hmm.
Per defined type of student?
Yeah, your allotments are still there.
So the district is almost incentivized to keep certain types of students, bilingual students, or things like that, to make larger allotments. Is that what's happening?
Well, I don't know if they would be or not. There's larger expenses because you've got to educate those kids. You see what I'm saying? If the allotment for that student was too much, yeah, you might incentivize it, but I don't think anybody believes our current wage are too much for those kids. You know what I'm saying? The bilingual allotment at point one, add on to bilingual, doesn't come close to covering the cost of bilingual to add to the cover. Same for coffee and those kind of things. So yeah, you're right. If for whatever reason we got those weights too high, I guess it could become that.
But the more important part of the question is that it is per student, it's just per defined type of student.
In other words, it's the sum of your allotments. There is the first thing now, and we do a lot of calculation in ours, but it doesn't have anything to do with funding. It's just for comparison at the end. And what it does is it comes out to be the same because the WADA makes it the same. That's the weighted student approach is instead of just looking at ADA, the weighted student is what equalizes it because it says, okay, this student has a weight of this much and on to just ADA.
So if we decide as a state that the weighted student cost should be, that we should be able to educate our students well for $8,000 per weighted average or defining it, then you're saying that if that goes across the district has 10,000 students, you multiply it out, and that's how much they're on.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's what it is.
Okay, that's straightforward.
That's basically it. Basically what you do is you say the basic allotment generates the regular program. And so if the regular kid to go to college, to educate him to go to college, just a regular kid doesn't need any special treatment or special conditions. If that costs $6,000, then you offset the basic allotment at $6,000, that kind of thing. And then that drives the weights on the others because they're all built off of that. Okay. And so, of course, yeah, okay, 5 minutes. Okay, hey, I did good if I got 5 minutes. I got a feeling I probably passed that. But anyway, y'all be nice to me. I appreciate that. Okay, so final thoughts. These make sense for everybody. The funding system ought to make sense for everybody. Should be something you can explain to anybody. It's easy enough to explain. And one of the things that happens to us so often is we get to things that are so complicated that we can't see the simple anymore. And that's what Wayne and I work. I mean, it took us forever to get to here because we deal with it so complicated all the time. Getting your mind back to where, okay, well, if you just went back to basics, kind of like they were cooking restaurants on, oh gosh, what's the town? Lincoln, just getting back to basics. That's kind of what we got to do with school things. It needs to be based on actual cost, substantially equal access to some similar education, similar tax rate, based on actual cost. It should be fair to taxpayers, which is making it fair to taxpayers and substantially equal resources at substantially equal tax effort. But that's the final thoughts on it. You got this now. You could. Our system looks like that. There's a lot of difference between going on in this one and this one. I like my chances of explaining that better than the other one. Okay. All right. We're one Texas. All of our kids are Texans, and somehow we got to pull it together and educate all. Any questions? Hopefully, what I've said makes sense. Hopefully, If you have any questions, it's freeman@equitycenter.org is my email address, or peers@equitycenter.org. We'll be glad to visit with anybody anytime about it. If you visit with your legislator, your senator, or your representative, and want us to visit with him too about it, if you'll let us know, we'll be glad to do that. And I appreciate your time and consideration very much. Thank y'all.
As Jesus said, I'm Monica Leatherman. I'm with Financial Benefit Services, and our firm is actually based, our headquarters is in the Richardson, or is in Richardson, up by Dallas. However, I am with the local team that we have here in Houston right now. FBS, we represent about 450 schools in the state of Texas. That includes charter schools as far as their benefits. A lot of the information I have today, or at least the front portion of it, is stuff y'all already know, but it was a nice precursor into talking about MEC plans. Has anybody ever heard of a MEC plan? Does anybody have one in their district right now? All right, a MEC plan is a minimum, that stands for minimum essential coverage. And what we have found is that this is a very nice alternative for your subs and part-time teachers in your district. Of course, we know we've got ACA compliance, and we really don't know at this point what's going to happen to that. You know, we've talked about repeal and replace, provisions in ACA that would stay. We don't know what's going to happen with the employer mandate. We don't know what's going to happen with the individual mandate. However, even if those things go away, I think what we're going to be talking about here is good information to take going into your next benefit plan year. Something like this could even be implemented mid-year if you would want to. Now, I used to work, before I started working for FBS, which I've been with FBS for 5 years now, I worked for Humble ISD. And I was their Director of Financial Services Operations, and Employee Benefits was one of the departments that was under my directorship. So I got to work with Employee Benefits a lot. When we went out and had open enrollments, I would talk to a lot of the employees, talk to the subs. Now, when I was there, that was before all the individual mandate and everything, kicked in, but what is one of the main things, or probably the main thing you hear from substitutes or part-time employees when it comes to benefit enrollments, and they look at TRS Active Care? What do they say? Can't afford it. Can't afford it. I sit down with so many employees every year as I'm out with all the districts that I work with, and sit down with employees, and they absolutely come in, especially the new hires, because they haven't seen the benefits in the past. They come in and they say, man, I want to get that, I need to get the medical insurance. And then they get to that in our enrollment system, it's one of the first things that come up. And I mean, you just see the color drain out of their face. And they say, well, I can't afford that. And so they decline it. Now, most of the districts that we work with do offer their part-times and subs the insurance, just to be safe. Is that pretty much what everybody in here, even though you don't have to, because they don't meet the requirements for having to offer them coverage, but because you're tracking hours, and you may have a substitute that ends up getting a permanent sub position, and all of a sudden they're a regular employee for so many months, and the tracking of hours, most districts statewide just offer the benefits to all the employees just to stay safe. Because we have the two penalties. The first one kicks in for failing to offer a plan to at least 95% of your employees that includes minimum essential coverage. The second penalty then comes in if that coverage is not deemed to be affordable, so therefore meeting the income required, which is the 9.5% of their annual earnings, or that it provides minimum value, which is 60% or a bronze, basically a bronze level plan. The two penalties, we have the A penalty. Of course, that's $2,160 for every employee that you have, minus 30. Very gracious, I don't know where that 30 came in, but 30 employees, thanks. If you're not offering affordable coverage, or I'm sorry, minimum essential coverage to at least 95% of your employees, and that penalty, of course, as you know, is calculated for every employee, every full-time employee that you have, minus that 30 employee allotment. So that's the penalty that's called the sledgehammer penalty. The other penalty referred to as the tack hammer is B. That's where the plan has to be both affordable and provide minimum value, so that's 60% that I mentioned before. Of course, these penalties aren't kicking in unless that employee does, you're not offering the ACA compliant coverage. They go out onto the marketplace and get a plan, and they get a subsidy. That's when the penalty kicks in. This just covers the individual mandate. Again, everybody at this point is required to carry some form of health coverage. If they don't, they run into the penalty when they file their income taxes for 2016, which is the period everybody's getting their 1095s all ready to go out to their employees and to get filed with the IRS. Of course, that penalty, when they do their taxes, is going to be calculated at 2.5% of their household income, $695 per adult, $347.50 for children, but a maximum penalty of $2,085 per household. So we run into the challenges, again, with your substitutes and your part-timers. You want to provide them something. You know they're just like you and your family. They want to have some type of coverage. They want to be able to go and see a doctor and get health care for their families. The affordability with no district contribution, most of them just absolutely cannot afford it. The affordability of going out and finding a major medical plan can also be cumbersome. And then, of course, if they don't obtain one, then they're faced with that individual mandate. So in response to some of our districts asking us, what can you find something that we can offer to our part-time substitutes that we don't have to provide a contribution to, and it would give them a form of health coverage that would be deemed, not to meet the affordability required by ACA, but just for their personal household budgets, something that would be seen as being affordable. So we brought them MEC plans. These have been around for about 2 years, really started evolving with Obamacare. That's where they started to come into the market. So they are not health insurance, but it is an affordable alternative to health care. It does help you get out of that A penalty because it does offer minimum essential coverage as defined by ACA. There's no contribution required. The participation requirements are very, very low, typically 10 employees. There's no health questions asked, so these are guarantee issue policies, so they're not policies that have pre-existing, condition limitations or anything like that. And they're very affordable. A basic MEC plan is about $75 per month for just employee-only coverage. And then they're very customizable. You can offer different plans that have added benefits for employees that may want a little bit more robust plan. So again, minimum essential coverage as defined by the Affordable Care Act simply provides 100% preventative care. Again, it's not health insurance. Or a medical plan. So we always have to be very, very clear when we're talking to the applicable employees about these types of plans that it is not a medical plan. However, it meets or satisfies rather that individual mandate to have some type of coverage. So these are the types of benefits that a MEC plan has. So you see everything up here related to preventative care. Routine physical exams, mammograms, well woman exams, well baby exams. I always throw in the joke, I say well man exams. We know that you don't go and have those done, and those don't really exist. But I always throw that in there. Routine labs and x-rays, cancer screenings, bone density, immunizations. That's immunizations for adults, immunizations for kids. And then counseling on various types, health-related topics, depression, drug and alcohol abuse, smoking cessation, domestic interpersonal violence. So all preventative care. Those benefits alone put together in a plan will satisfy the individual mandate for those employees and get them access to at least preventative care or preventative health care. Like I said, they're very customizable. You can offer or add different types of benefits into these plans. The districts that we have put them in kind of have a low, medium, and high that they decided to offer. But you can add on things like doctor's office visits, different types of diagnostic testing, daily hospital confinement, first day hospital confinement. So that very first day of hospital confinement would be paid to them at a higher rate than each day afterwards. Your daily hospital confinement, that's typically going to have some type of limitation on it. You can pick, you could pick 30 days, you could pick 60 days, but it's going to have some type of a limitation. It's not 360, days of continuous confinement. Substance abuse confinement, nursing facilities, pharmaceutical benefits, even the base level MEC plans will have not a full copay pharmacy system like when we go and we pay $5 for our prescription or something like that, but it's discounted pharmacy programs to make those prescriptions a little bit more affordable. ICU confinement, again, just a variety of benefits that can be added onto these plans to make them a little bit more robust, provide a little bit more coverage for anyone that may want a little bit richer benefit plan for themselves or their employees. And then again, just the cost. They're available in 4 tiers. I just showed the bottom tier and the top tier. So, but you can get employee only, employee child, employee spouse, or the full family coverage. So just a sample cost, about $75 a month for a basic plan for the employee, $180 a month for family coverage on a basic plan. And then if you go with this is a really robust plan, has pretty much all of the benefits, those add-ons included in it. You're looking at $118 a month for employee only, or maybe $400 a month for a family. One of our largest district that's implemented the MEC plans was Arlington ISD. So they just recently, this last year, did an enrollment with just their part-time sub-employees and gave them the opportunity to enroll or pick up a MEC plan, and then those were effective on a tax year basis, just hitting them starting January 1st. So they would have coverage going into this next year. Some districts aren't interested, but it's out there. So if your consultant hasn't ever offered a MEC plan to you, you haven't ever heard about them, you'd like to learn a little bit more about them, I can certainly give you my business card. The last slide here does tell just a little bit about FBS, kind of who we are and what we do. what our principles are. I do have some information up here. If you'd like some information on our company, I also brought some brochures on our East Texas Employee Benefits Cooperative. We manage 9 benefit cooperatives throughout the state. The East Texas Cooperative is actually sponsored through the Region 6 Educational Service Center. There are about 70 schools in that cooperative. So just the buying power, they offer some really rich benefit plans at premium rates to the district and to your employees that they're very challenging to beat anywhere else. But we can certainly get you some more information on MEC plans and sit down with you and let you put craft one that you'd like to offer to your employees if you find that of interest. But does anybody have any questions on the MEC? Or, with TRS Active Care, we've got the possibility that they're going to allow larger districts of 1,000 employees or more, to possibly leave the pool. If you're in, is everybody pretty much in TRS Active Care that's in here right now? Yeah. And we don't know. We met with Aetna just last week, and they're not really sure. The legislation has been written that would give districts the opportunity to leave the pool if they would choose to do so, but it has to be actually taken up by the speaker up in Austin to have it actually get on the floor for discussion and a vote. And if he doesn't decide to put that on, then it's not going to be discussed. So we honestly don't know if that's something that will come into being for this year, or if that's something that may come up in a later session. Aetna does have claims information. They do track claims by district, so if the district does opt to leave the pool, then they can certainly access their claims information to take their medical insurance out to bid. That would create quite a busy market in the spring and summer whenever they would make that decision, so districts could get ready for their fall enrollments. So right now, we really don't know what TRS is going to do, and we really don't know what is going to happen with the Affordable Care Act and when various provisions of repeal and replace or whatever they come up with, when those things are going to come into being. But again, if you have any questions, I know we got to watch the swearing in, and that was extremely nice of Jesus to enable us to break away for a second and see that. It's Friday. I don't want to take up any more of your time. For those of you that have to go back to work, or for those of you that just, maybe might be going on to your house. But they're pretty straightforward. And like I said, they really do provide a nice benefit for those employees to give them some coverage that would be difficult to find somewhere else that would satisfy their mandate and be something real that they can actually use. So thank you very much. And again, I've got some information up here if you'd like it. And like I said, are any questions?